Welcome, Steele Watchers, to SteeleWatching, which is a podcast for Remington Steele fans. My name is Sara, and I am the hockey fan desperately watching the current playoff series and totally shocked that for the first time in 19 years, the Leafs made it past round one.
Well,
sorry.
Congratulations, I guess.
Well, I don't like the Leafs, so I was hoping they'd lose.
There's always that.
Yeah. Oh. Your turn.
Okay. I'm Eric. I'm your other host. I'm the frozen, well, I was going to say frozen Alaskan, but at the moment,
sounds like
nice
a type
and
of
warm.
fish.
It's probably, yeah. It's nice and warm and all the snow is melting and it's like almost spring. So my allergies tell me.
Yeah. Spring has sprung. The grass has riz. I wonder where the flowers is. That's my, I'm
not
a poet.
Here yet.
I'm a poet.
Hey, before we get into this episode, two things. First of all, I think we should acknowledge a donation from Anna. She was kind enough to contribute to our expenses by a PayPal donation.
Thank you.
And that helped cover some of the costs of 1 month's worth of our providing this podcast to you. So thank you, Anna.
This podcast is brought to you by Anna.
Except no substitutes. And then, of course, the other somewhat embarrassing and frustrating announcement is that if this episode sounds a little rehearsed, it's not because we necessarily rehearsed. It's because it's our second attempt.
If we rehearsed, this would sound much more professional.
Yes. But we tried this once before, and we had numerous technical issues on top of numerous technical issues, compounded by numerous technical issues.
Yep.
And it was, there was no recovering it. So this is our second try. So like we said, if it sounds rehearsed, it's because it kind of is.
Yeah, it's take two.
Not on purpose.
It can only be better, though.
Take two.
Right? Like,
yes.
Can only get better. That's what I'm telling myself.
Oh, couldn't get any worse.
That's true. That's true. Welcome. Hopefully everybody enjoyed our new slogan. It couldn't get any worse.
Yeah. Anyway.
So today.
I'm ready if you are.
Yeah, today we are going to be talking about the 21st episode of Season 1, Sting of Steele. And this episode first aired on April 5th, 1983. And it was written by Michael Gleason and Gary Cott and directed by our friend Seymour Robbie, except no substitutes. And for this one, I went...
Hey, Seymour, how you doing, buddy?
Seymour Snow? See less snow. You're seeing less snow.
Yes.
So the TV guide listing is what I went with from Judith's book.
Okay.
And it says, Efrem Zimbalist Jr. and daughter Stephanie make antagonists as con man extraordinaire Daniel Chalmers and his pursuer Laura Holt, who is astonished to find him working a stylish sting with Steele, his one-time protégé, all the while making an equally polished play for her mother. I have to say, and I didn't notice this the first time around, so maybe it's good that this is take two, I appreciate the alliteration in that TV guide listing. The stylish sting and polished play it's well done. There's some thought that went into that.
Yes.
And
okay, TV guide, you've recovered your credibility.
We forgive you.
Yes.
It's got as an English teacher, literary devices were used. So yeah, it's fine. And for what I'm calling our macro thoughts, this is one of those episodes that I sometimes forget is not a season finale. In many ways, for me, this one feels like the season finale of season 1. And so, like, it being kind of the penultimate episode, I just like saying that word, it always confuses me a little bit because it's got everything a season finale should have. It plays homage to the Sting, and, you know, the two episodes prior, or some of the episodes in this season have done that with, like, The Trouble with Harry and Vintage Steele, and The Treasure of the Sierra Madre with Steele's Golds, and the North by Northwest episode early on in the season, so it's doing that, but it also encompasses all the characters. Like it gives everybody something to do, and then it brings in even more characters. Like you've got Abigail Holt who comes back, and it's bizarre that she's only in the show for 2 episodes, and it feels like she's there for much more. I don't know about you, but it really does feel like we get more of a presence of her than we actually get. So what were your kind of observations and thoughts on that?
I agree definitely about the episode feeling like a season finale. And for a lot of the reasons that you said, because we do have pretty much the entire core cast involved. Yeah. We've got Murphy, we've got Bernice, which is nice because they are regular cast members, supposedly.
Theoretically.
we do have Abigail. She is a returning character. Yeah. So it is like a culmination of different things that have gone on during the season, even though she wasn't a regular presence.
Yeah.
It certainly has more of a season finale feel than the actual season finale, which is Steele in circulation. So, yes, absolutely. And, as far as Abigail, in some ways, even though she's not really in any more episodes in the future, in some ways it feels like it because there are references to her by Laura, by her sister later on.
Yeah.
And so it's not like she's just been written out and totally forgotten, like sometimes happens with characters that are supposed to be family members, like the third sister, the third Holt sister has disappeared.
Well, we don't know if she was a sister. Her mother just says my middle one. It could have been a son.
Well, okay. Fine.
Just pointing that out.
You're right.
Just making trouble. Boy, that's sexist.
I was thinking that... No, I was just thinking that somewhere along the way, she had commented about her 3 daughters.
No, she just said Laura's always been difficult, my middle one. So, I mean, I could see how you could make that assumption because if she's saying my middle one, it could be my middle daughter. But I always just took it to mean like my middle child.
Yeah. But like that third Holt child who disappeared and was never mentioned again, even in the episodes where Laura's sister was in. Abigail is mentioned. So you're right. She does seem to have more of a presence in the series beyond her physical presence.
And I mean, you can't, like, Beverly Garland is just so, like, she has such a presence when she's on screen that you just, you feel her presence long after she's gone. And as you said, with Frances showing up and we get a few episodes, I think it's 2 episodes, maybe 3 with Frances. I can't remember. I know we get her
2, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah. So we get 2 of those, and they sort of carry that through because every reference to Abigail Holt, you think, okay, Beverly Garland. You can picture her saying and doing certain things, and it just, So it's wonderful to see her here, and then the addition of Daniel Chalmers, which of course,
Efrem
Zimbalist Jr. being Stephanie's dad adds a whole other layer to his presence being there because there's such wonderful chemistry between the 2 of them. And I commented before on how sometimes when you have people acting together that are either related or married, you don't always see the chemistry in the characters because they don't necessarily have to perform it, and that's real life chemistry doesn't work the same way, TV romantic or familial chemistry does. So sometimes it feels like you're watching something that isn't, like, that's kind of flat. And we don't get that with Stephanie and Efrem. We just get this wonderful back and forth cat and mouse thing in this episode that's just perfect, and it carries on into further episodes too. So it's really nice that we have that piece of it along with the ensemble, because we haven't gotten the ensemble much. We've talked about this before, and how this episode is a perfect example of how they could have done it. They could have had every character involved. We could have had, there is no part of this episode that is wasted. It is tightly paced. It is tightly plotted. Every piece of dialogue, every scene, like there is, it almost feels like we could have had a longer episode and it still wouldn't have felt padded, right? Like there's nothing here that feels like they're just wasting time. So in that respect, maybe that's why it feels a bit more like a season finale, because it's just so well constructed, I guess.
Right. And you talking about the on-screen chemistry of characters that are being played by people who have off-screen relationships. I think maybe those situations highlight, I may get in trouble for saying this, a lack of acting skill, because that is probably one of the hardest acting situations.
Oh, for sure.
That an actor could be in, I imagine. And I would think that that's where, if you can succeed at that kind of an acting situation, it's because you have the acting chops. And if you can't do it, then I'm not saying you're a bad actor in other situations, most other situations, but you failed the ultimate test.
Yeah. Yeah, like there's no chemistry, for example, between Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman when I see them on screen, when they were together. I mean, that could be for other reasons, but like you don't see, like, it's flat. They're just flat. They don't have that same spark that you would see with a fictionalized couple. And I think you're right that it's partly acting, and I think it's partly too that they probably assume that because the relationship is already there, that they don't have to try, which is not really
lack of professionalism.
It's like, it's fine. We're together. It's good. So you definitely see that effort being put in with Stephanie and Efrem. Like, it's in every scene, and you can see that they genuinely love working together. So it's really enjoyable with this episode. And the only other question I had before talking about the actual episode is Sting movies. I know this is part 2, so I've already asked you this question, but I thought about it since. My favorite Sting movie is another Pierce movie. It's Thomas Crown Affair, which of course we've talked about as well as a remake.
Yes.
One of the few remakes that supersedes the original by a mile because of what they changed and what they did to it. But it's not really a Sting movie per se. It's more of a heist film, but there are elements of a Sting in it. So I guess I'm counting it, even though it doesn't really technically count. Are there any movies other than, of course, The Sting that you would put in that category?
Well, see, here's where my lack of knowledge of film comes into play, because I'm not a big movie buff in the sense that a lot of people are.
Right.
There's a lot of movies I haven't seen, including The Sting, simply because there's nothing really appealing to me about any of it, the actors or anything else like that. I'm not saying I wouldn't watch it,
right,
but it's not one I go out of my way to watch. The Pierce Brosnan remake of Thomas Crown, I would really call that a Sting film, because we see the crime at the beginning, and it's more about all the things that are being done to catch him and trap him in it, which is really what a sting is. You're trying to catch that person. The crime's already been committed.
Yeah.
So I would say it definitely falls within the Sting genre. But yeah, as far as any other films of that nature, I'm the wrong guy to ask.
It's okay. You're forgiven. We'll keep you.
Oh, thank you.
So getting into the episode itself, I guess. So we begin in London, England, at a casino, at a roulette wheel specifically. And there's the man who we later know as Daniel Chalmers. He's wearing a wig, has a fake hearing aid, and he's got someone else with him.
Can we talk about that wig?
Yeah, let's talk about the wig.
That is the worst wig I've ever
Holy crap, yes.
Seen,
it's awful.
I think.
I mean, it should have its own credit as an actor. Like it's its own entity.
But shouldn't that have clued? I mean, that alone should have clued somebody in that there's something wrong with this. And then, of course, every time Chalmers messes with his hearing aid, the ball does weird things.
It literally looks possessed. Like, it's jumping from thing to thing.
I mean,
that's not how gravity works.
But that wig, I mean, that's something out of science fiction.
It's from...
But yeah, that wig was just terrible.
Okay, so here's my question. This wasn't one I asked. Where do we think they got it? I mean, did they go to like Spirit the Halloween store or something like that? Was it?
I think so. I think so. Either that or they just went down to the five and dime and got something from the kids section. Hey, your makeup costume kit that you buy for $5.95 that includes a wig and a fake mustache and whatever.
It was like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde costume or something like. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, and he picked the Hyde costume.
I agree. It was a painful, painful wig. And yeah, it was how they managed to get away with that, and how Hoskins didn't clue in that it was a wig is beyond silly. But
yeah,
we're just gonna go with it because. But yeah, they're clearly cheating, and as you said, every time. His partner bets, Chalmers uses his hearing aid to alter the course of the ball. So, and as you said, it's literally like bouncing out of one slot and into whatever number it is that they want. And so this is the part, and this confused me when I first watched it. I thought because when you see the camera switch to a person pressing a button, I originally thought that it was the guy running the table that was pressing the button, because Hoskins says customers don't cheat us, we cheat them. So I thought it was him like pressing the button to make sure it landed somewhere else. But is that not correct? Is it Chalmers hearing is the major pressing the button, or who's pressing the button?
No, that's the roulette wheel, whatever you call him, the guy running the wheel, the house guy. Because, and this is a little bit of a repeat for you and I, but we'll talk about it for the benefit of the listeners. Roulette wheels have historically been suspect. Let's put it that way. There are mechanisms that can and have been used by casinos to manipulate the results of the wheel. It doesn't seem like that would be a reasonable thing to believe could happen, but they have. If you look at how people are lined up on a roulette wheel, there's blind spots for all the players, because it's like looking over the ledge of a cliff or a building or whatnot. You can't really see what's underneath you. And that's the way those roulette wheels are set up. And so they had these mechanisms installed in the blind spots, and a skilled roulette wheel operator could make the ball basically land wherever they wanted. And at one point it was all mechanical, and then later it became magnetic, electrical. And patrons, gamblers, also used mechanisms to cheat. There was an incident where a lady, I believe it was like an older lady, was rolled in on a wheelchair up to the roulette table. First clue would have been that the wheelchair she was in was supposed to be a battery-operated, self-maneuvering, powered wheelchair, but they manually rolled it up to the roulette table.
Okay.
First clue.
Clever.
And inside of the wheelchair, hidden, was a magnetic system that generated an electrical magnetic field that manipulated the ball, because it used to be that the balls were a metal construction.
Right.
And so they were cheating and operating the wheel and getting the ball to land basically where they wanted to. And then they raked in all this money and then left, again, manually pushing the lady out. Later, balls became constructed of plastic material, so they're not susceptible to magnetic interference. But in that example of the lady in the wheelchair, that wheelchair was a bank of batteries, because that's what it took to accomplish that, because of the distance between where the players sit and where the ball is. How would you do something like that in a device that is about the size of a cigarette pack, like his hearing aid is? I don't know. I don't think you could.
This is one of those, like, we're supposed to believe the technology exists when it doesn't exist sort of things.
Well, James Bond stuff, Yeah,
like
a lot of it is really, really fantastical. But the fact is, there are technologies that are developed, particularly for governments, for militaries, for spy organizations, that if we knew about them when they were developed, would seem somewhat fantastic. And then it's only years later that we find that technology moving into the mainstream market. The internet is an example of that, actually.
For sure.
It was originally created by the U.S. military, and for years was operated by them with absolutely no public access to it. And the whole idea at the time would have seemed fantastic. But here we are.
Well, I mean, you've got that whole concept that science fiction often becomes science fact, right? So you've got like how Star Trek, the communicator being a precursor to what we now know as a cell phone, and sort of other things that kind of are created. But I'm thinking more in terms of like, you see something being done on TV and it's using technology, like you said, that we do kind of have, but to do something that we can't yet do, but something we could conceivably do. Like if you've ever seen that Sandra Bullock movie, The Net, from like 1995, right? She's in that film. She works from home. She finds internet viruses, and her job is to like get rid of the viruses, fix the programs or whatever. But she's doing things like ordering plane tickets online, ordering pizza online, having chat, like messenger style chats with people, and just things that you couldn't like it wasn't possible yet in 1995, but watching it now, you're like, oh yeah, that's easy. We do that all the time. Like, so yeah, anyway, I think it might have been something like that where you might have technology that can kind of manipulate things like you were saying, but not necessarily in a little container the size of a cigarette pack that is made to look like a hearing aid.
Yeah. It would have to be something that was custom made, very unique technology, very advanced technology, and cutting edge. And the fact is, we not only do military and governments generate those kind of technologies, develop those kind of technologies, but one of the first places that they get used outside of those is perhaps in the criminal world.
Well, we do know that they met in the 10th Royal Hussars, so it could be military tech. I'm just... It was a joke.
That's a joke. Yes, that's okay. We'll get to that joke.
Yes. But side note, Granny getting her game on with the wheelchair scam. I mean, my hat's off to her. You do you, lady. That's a great plan.
Yes. Anyway, enough of my distractions.
So yeah, Daniel gets up, seemingly beaten, decides to leave as his partner cashes in the winnings, and they meet at the coat check. And this is clever. They switch the bags, which tells us they obviously have a level of trust, and they've done this before, because criminals typically aren't always people that are trustworthy. And so if you are giving $200,000 or pounds, I think it was, in cash to your partner, you obviously you trust him enough not to split with it.
Right.
And so he leaves. The major almost gets out. He's this close. And the guy stops him, because we've seen, the scene where he goes in and tells Hoskins somebody's cheating them. And Hoskins says not to let him leave. They bring him into Hoskins' office. He accuses him of having a partner to cheat the wheel, which he did, and threatens to kill him unless he gives Chalmers up. Pulls out a gun. The major gives him away, which I don't think we can blame him. And of course, Hoskins shoots him anyway. So my question is, why do people ever trust the bad guys when they say they'll let them live?
Human nature. You want to believe that somebody's gonna let you. Nobody is so cruel and heartless and evil as to just blow somebody away just because. And that's not how normal people think. And so you presume that there's some rationality, some element of humanity in that person. And yeah, it doesn't always work out that well.
No. Although I don't know about you, but if there's a dude pointing a gun with a silencer in my face, I'm going to assume that the humanity element that train has left the station. That's going to be my first assumption. But, maybe not. Who knows? I guess he was just hoping for the best, which unfortunately does not come to pass. So that is our...
No, I mean, if you can't trust a criminal, who can't you trust, right?
What is this world coming to? So then we see the scene change, and Hoskins is in the Remington Steele offices, and he is immediately a complete and utter jerk to Laura.
Oh, yeah.
Just bossing her around, demanding to meet Remington Steele, treating her like crap, telling her he didn't come, and you caught this first, so I'm going to let you take away with this. He didn't come 7,000 miles to be pawned off on some secretary. What's wrong with that?
Yeah. Well, in the script that we have, which was dated less than a month before the episode actually aired, it read 9,000 miles, which was totally bogus.
And I would walk 9,000 miles. No, sorry.
You realize that now we're going to have to pay royalties on that song.
Damn it. I changed it just enough.
So they reined it in a little bit, but it's still really, really wrong. Most of the online references that give direct flight distances list it as about 5,500 miles.
Yeah.
Actually, 5,454 miles, 8,777 kilometers. So, yeah, they were really off. Now, can we just assume that Hoskins was exaggerating for the purpose of making the point?
Hyperbolic.
Or, yes.
Or he just genuinely doesn't know how far it is.
Well, that's a possibility, too. I mean, he's obviously not the smartest tool in the shed.
He is definitely not the sharpest crayon in the box, no.
Yeah. So, yeah, that 7,000 miles, nope, sorry, Hoskins. Math doesn't fit.
Well, and it's funny because this is something that I found very interesting, that I've probably talked about this before, about how Canadians are having this identity crisis all the time when it comes to metric versus imperial, because like some things we use metric, some things we use imperial, and it's sort of a holdover for switching over and being right next to the US, right? So like we will say kilometers when we're talking about driving somewhere, it's X number of kilometers away. We'll say Celsius when we're talking about temperature, but if we're talking about a pool temperature, for example, we use Fahrenheit. Don't ask me why, and I don't understand it, but I know that 80 degrees Fahrenheit in the pool is great, but if you say it's 80 degrees outside, I have no frame of reference for that. And the UK, of all things, is like metric except for like distance. They use miles. And that confuses the crap out of me too, because when I'm over there and they talk about like it's this many miles per hour, and I'm like, huh, what? But you use. So I guess maybe they have an identity crisis too. I don't know.
I've wondered about that for a while in watching British TV shows. They will do that. They will reference the distance as miles or
it's very weird.
That sort of thing. And it's like, wait a second, this is a British show. Yeah. Did they reshoot some scenes for the American market?
They use miles there. Yeah. It's bizarre because they use...
And then they criticize us for using them. Yeah.
There you go. You've got something you can hold over. The next time you get into an argument with a Brit, you'd be like, oh yeah? Well, you use miles. Although their mileage signs are exceedingly polite to the point where it's kind of hilarious, because like in residential zones, the speed limit is usually like 20 miles per hour, right? So instead of just having a sign that says 20, they'll have cute little signs that say 20's plenty. Like it, yeah, right? Like 15's good, but 20's plenty. We don't want to do any more than that. And so I'm like, every time I see a 20's plenty sign, I'm like, well, isn't that sweet? Isn't that a sweet little way of saying like, no faster than this, please? Very British, very.
Yeah.
So I was getting a kick out of that.
So
Anyway. So yeah, he's a jerk. He treats Laura like crap, and Laura is essentially having none of it at this point, and she, for once, is ready to just boot him out the door. And she says, you can go elsewhere if you don't like it. And then he kind of backtracks a little bit and says, I'm a stranger in your country, and I heard Remington Steele was a man who always gets his man. And this is where Laura kind of asks, oh, are you looking for someone? And Hoskins gives this sob story about running a gambling club, having a client or a customer make a big win, not having enough money to cover it, and wanting to find Chalmers so he can, quote, give him what's coming to him. And this is one of those things that I pointed out before that is always it bugs me a little bit when I see it in television, because you've got a character making an intentionally vague statement that can come off as threatening if that's what the writers want. And if I were a human in this normal situation and I heard somebody say, I want to give him what's coming to him, I'm going to assume that that person does not have friendly intentions. It's kind of like when people say, have the day you deserve. So, I mean, should Laura have clued in here that maybe this wasn't on the up and up?
Well, of course, we know that Hoskins is not a good guy.
No.
I suppose it's possible that Laura hasn't picked up on that vibe yet, but yeah, you're right. The statement is a little bit like a mobster saying, "It would be a shame if something happened to your family."
Right?
It's not just the words, it's the tone.
Yeah.
And Hoskins had a bit of that tone in his voice.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And the script describes him as being very violent looking and like a man that sort of exudes violence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the thing is that Laura did come close to throwing him out, which actually begs a question. Why now would she stick to the rule of if somebody wants to work with Remington Steele, we turn it down? That was the whole problem in License to Steal when Murphy says, Laura, we made an agreement. And that's what led to this whole situation. But now she does it.
I don't know if in this case it's so much that she's sticking to the rule of we don't let anybody meet Remington Steele. I think it's more that for whatever reason,
he's a jerk.
He was a
she
jerk,
doesn't want to deal
and
with him.
This might have just been the day where she was giving 0 Fs. You know what I mean? She was just at this point where I'm not taking this. I don't have to take this, right? The agency is at a point where they have enough notoriety that she can afford to kick a sexist creep out of her out of the office. So I'm guessing that was it. But yeah.
No, I agree that was really her motivation, but it just does seem a little bit interesting that now all of a sudden after all of this situation she's found herself ending up in with dealing with this faux Remington Steele.
Yeah.
That it all came about because she didn't do that very thing at the beginning.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. So anyway, so he's telling her.
Yeah. And then he basically tells Laura that his sources tell him that Chalmers is coming this way. He likes to live high off the hog. You picked up on something he said about the restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
That was a
frog restaurants. Yeah.
So go ahead. Tell me about that.
Yes. And it's always been curious because in a lot of TV shows, particularly some of the older British shows or shows that are set back in time in Britain, a lot of the characters refer to the French as frogs.
Yeah.
And in Poirot, for example, somebody insults Poirot by calling him a bloody little frog. And he's offended and he says, no, I'm not a bloody little frog. I'm a bloody little Belgian.
He was a Belgian.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
And the term, obviously, it's meant to be derogatory, but I was curious about where it came from. And there was a website I found, and it's written by a guy who I believe is French. And apparently there are several possible sources, one of which is supposedly that French restaurants serve frog legs, and so that was the reference. But in the Dictionary of Phrase and Fable of 1898, the author quotes the phrase, "What will the frogs or the people of Paris say?" And that was apparently a common court phrase at Versailles. And at the time, the area where Paris is now located was known as a mudland surrounded by swamps. So the occupants lived like frogs and toads in the swamps.
Oh, okay.
Or at least that was the attribution.
Huh.
Another possibility is that there was a guy apparently named King Clovis who had 3 frogs or toads in his heraldic shielding and flags.
Yep.
So, or at least until the time he converted to Christianity, at which time he adopted the fleur-de-lis. So that's a possibility as well. And then, of course, Nostradamus apparently got in on the act with one of his alleged prophecies. A lot of people don't believe that they're prophecies. They're just rambling nonsense. But regardless, one of them is something to the effect that ancient toads shall take Sara, Sara being Aris spelled backwards, and having something to do with the French city of Arras. It's all kind of a jumbled mess. I don't really follow it all.
No, but that is interesting. And I think it's interesting, too, how some language doesn't translate over and some does. And I said this before, but you can kind of tell later on in some places that this episode was written by an American observing a British person and sort of assuming certain language tics, like their mention of soccer, right? Yes, Americans would say soccer, absolutely. Canadians too. We say soccer, but the British would say football because that's
Correct.
what it is. And to the rest of the world, aside from literally, I think just Canada and the US, it's football or footy.
Right.
So there's elements of language that pops up later.
And I would assume that a British person or a European person talking about football, European football,
yes,
if they were talking to an American or Canadian, somebody who called it soccer, they might say football and then maybe correct themselves.
Yeah.
European football or something like that. Something to clarify that it's not American football.
Yeah, well, my husband.
So yeah, there's.
My husband calls it American.
Yeah, there's
football,
some.
And then football.
Yeah. So there's definitely some language things in this that slipped out that should have been corrected. And yeah, I think I'm going to guess that Pierce might have thought something about those, even if he hadn't said anything about it to the directors.
I kind of wonder about that because
or whatnot.
There's so much in here about football, about Manchester United and who being a fan of. Now I kind of wonder, is he a football fan? And if so, which team does he support? I'd really like to know. Sad that now that I'm only just wondering that, because immediately when you go to Glasgow, right, they have two teams in Glasgow, Celtic and Rangers. And those teams are divided not just on sports lines, but also on sectarian lines. Like it goes back to religion. So the Celtic is thought to be, I mean, there's Irish origins there. So the assumption is that if you support Celtic, you're Catholic. And if you support Rangers, you're Protestant. And it used to get quite violent. Like some of the matches would be quite violent. It's why when you go to watch a game, they separate the fans. You don't sit next to a guy cheering for a different team. That just doesn't happen because the fights that broke out were not good. So I wonder, because he's Irish, but anyway, just
and there was a war fought over a
there was
soccer/football game once.
Yeah. So it could.
I think it was in South America. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting that I'm only just thinking of that because I'm genuinely curious as to. I'm going to assume Pierce would support Celtic if we're talking Scottish football because Celtic is the Irish team. And anyway, not relevant. But
he may take the road of discretion and valor and say that he just enjoys the game and doesn't have any favorites so as not to offend any fans, regardless of which side of the fence they're on.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it would be an interesting question is all I'm saying. But anyway, so back to the episode. Laura opts. So basically, she's kind of like in the process of ushering him out the door, trying to. And then Bernice buzzes and tells her that she has good news and bad news, and which would she like first. So Laura opts for the good news first, which Bernice tells her that Steele has called in sick. And the bad news is apparently that her mother is there. And this is great because the music immediately changes. And it's almost like the score of a horror film because you can just see the look on Stephanie's face. It's like, oh God, no, not now, right? And so she leaves the office to find Abigail Holt sitting on the sofa, and her mother immediately assumes Laura is angry with her by saying, "You're wondering why the old battle axe didn't call first," which is thank you, Beverly Garland, for just existing. That's all I have to say. And then Laura diplomatically tells her, "Oh, it's always good to see you, Mother, no matter how unexpected." To which Abigail replies that Laura makes her the happiest mother in the world before bursting into tears. And we're talking like loud sobs that are just hilariously over the top. Like her weeping is fantastic. And poor Laura is just completely at a loss as to what to do. This is clearly something that she does not see from her mother very much. And so she sits down to comfort her, directs her into her office. She's still sobbing loudly when Hoskins comes out to see what the racket is. And she claims that she's an overjoyed client and promises to start looking for Chalmers right away. So this is all just perfect. Like just the way you've got the moving pieces already in the same the same scene, right? Hoskins, again, has a very vague comment that sounds threatening because he says, don't tell Danny boy I'm here. Don't tell him I'm here. I want to see the look on old Danny boy's face when I pay him off. I mean, that's, again, going back to the mobster phrase. That's like, you would say, I want to see the look on his face when I give him his money. If you're genuinely trying to give somebody money that you owe them, you're not going to be like, I want to see the look on his face when I pay him off. Like, okay, sure, but I guess we're going to assume, and I think you agree with me here, that Laura's just too distracted at this point by her mother.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, yes, let's not talk about mothers.
So we've got Laura shutting the door, Bernice saying, what's wrong with mom? And I really love the way she says, what's wrong with mom? As if Abigail's her mom too. Like, that's cute. And Laura says she doesn't know, and she will certainly find out in copious detail, to which she immediately corrects herself and says, stop it, Laura, she's your mother. She's obviously in a great deal of pain. The workload is light, so she should devote all her attention to helping her. To which her eyes then drift to the phone.
Well, and there's part of that script that didn't make it into the episode.
I forgot about that.
Where it's like Laura says, yes, I'll find out in copious detail. Stop it, she's your mother. And then the part that was left out actually references back to thou shalt not steal.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it ties into some things that come out later in a different way. And what the line is I'll admit there are times when she sets my teeth on edge, always comparing me to my sister.
Yep.
You could take a lesson from Frances, house in Connecticut, live in help, and her husband owns 12 athletic footwear stores, which is, again, a direct reference to what was mentioned in Thou Shalt Not Steal.
Yep.
And yet her sister, Frances, is married to Donald, who is an orthodontist. And that comes in later in this script as well. So there's a lot of mixed up facts. That they're not necessarily mixed up in this episode or in Thou Shalt Not Steal, but they definitely get mixed up later on based on somebody
they retcon it,
getting something wrong.
They retcon it later, and they also retcon the middle child thing, right? Retcon. So retcon is a term that is used when you've got a TV show that establishes something, or a movie, a franchise of some sort that establishes one thing and then later basically just completely changes the story and pretends that thing didn't exist, or alters it in some way to make it make sense in a different way. So basically saying, like, this didn't happen, we're forgetting this, we're now doing this. So they basically retcon his being someone that owns athletic footwear stores and change him into, they say he's a dentist, but I don't know if they say he's an orthodontist. We know Harvey Fennerman's an orthodontist, but I don't know if we ever hear what kind of a dentist Donald is. But I could be wrong.
Yeah, I could be wrong too. I just assumed that since he worked in an office with Harvey, Harvey is an orthodontist, that he was also an orthodontist. But I suppose it's possible that you've got a combined office where you've got general dentistry as well as orthodontia.
Well, because there's different types of, you could be a dental surgeon, you could be, so anyway, I just looked up the definition because I wanted to give a proper definition for retcon. For those who are curious, basically it is a noun, or it could be a verb, and it basically means in a film, television series, or other fictional work, a piece of new information that imposes a different interpretation on previously described events, typically used to facilitate a dramatic plot shift or an account for inconsistency. If we're using it as a verb, to revise an aspect of a fictional work retrospectively, typically by introducing a piece of new information that imposes a different interpretation on previously described events. So, this is basically...
Yeah, except, all right, Donald, that's not really a reinterpretation. That's just a complete whitewash.
Yeah, it is. It is, but, that's the closest I can think to describing what they do, is they just kind of we're going to forget this. And it's kind of like when you recast a character a couple seasons later, like you introduce somebody as like a character's mother or father, and then 2 seasons later, it's a different actor because you maybe couldn't get that first person back or whatever, so...
Yeah. Or even a series regular. Last Man Standing recast one of the characters after the first season.
Yep.
So.
Aunt Viv, Prince Fresh Prince. But yeah, so Bernice.
Yeah, so it happens.
Bernice points out, and I'll let you take this one as well, because she says Skeezix is out with a cold, and we both went down a rabbit hole researching the word Skeezix.
Yes.
So I'll let you go down the rabbit hole for us there.
Yeah, and interestingly, they spell a little bit differently
they did.
in the script than is spelled elsewhere. But the term has a couple of different meanings depending on what you believe and where you find it. The generally accepted definition seems to be a rascal, a rogue, a mean, contemptible fellow. It's a word of unknown origin, perhaps a fanciful formation, and by the early 20th century, it was often used affectionately or playfully of children. However, there was an American comic strip called Gasoline Alley, which originated in 1919, and one of the characters became a parent to a child, which was named Skeezix.
Yeah.
Now, according to Britannica, which, I mean, Britannica encyclopedia people, you'd think that they kind of have their act together.
You would think.
They say that Skeezix is a cowboy slang term for an orphaned calf. I would sure like to know where they came up with that definition, because I cannot find any definition of Skeezix anywhere that references orphan calves.
I looked too.
It just doesn't. It's not there.
Yeah, I was searching that. I was doing that same Google search. So yeah, I couldn't find it either. But it is a.
Yeah. So I think we'll stick with rascal, rogue, mean, and contemptible fellow.
Definitely fits.
Yes.
So rascal for sure. Rogue definitely. Contemptible occasionally. So
depending on who you ask.
Depends on the day. So Bernice asks her if she wants to call him to delay having to talk to her mother, and Laura pretends to be appalled by that assumption before telling Bernice to get him on the phone. So she does, and Steele answers from the tarmac of an airport, covering his nose and claiming to have a beastly cold. And at first, Laura is taken in for a moment, saying he sounds awful, but then gets suspicious of the jet engine that is literally in the background. And Steele claims to be watching 30 Seconds Over Tokyo and says it makes him proud to be in this country, which is, of course, total crap. He tells Laura it's time to take his medicine, begs her not to come and see him, as one of them has to stay healthy. And then when he hangs up, he comments on how wonderful call forwarding is, which is obviously what he's done. And here, my question here, because you picked up on this, who's driving the car?
It's not Fred.
Yeah.
Don't know who it is, but I know who it ain't.
I looked in the script and it just says the chauffeur. The script doesn't even refer to him as Fred. So do we think that he hired an outside chauffeur so that it wouldn't get back to Laura?
That's the most rational explanation outside of just the notion that the actor who played Fred on a regular basis wasn't available for some reason.
Yeah.
But within the context of the script, yeah, that makes sense. He hired somebody to drive it because, Laura and Fred, they talk.
Yes, they do. So yeah, it's kind of funny.
Yeah, and there were a couple of other things that we discussed. One being call forwarding.
Call forwarding, yeah.
Yes, you had asked about that. And your question was, did it even exist back then, really, in a practical sense?
It seemed like a really clever way to get around what he needed to get around, right? She's calling his apartment and getting the phone in the car.
Yeah, and for anybody who's of your generation, that is, a youngster.
How do you know I am a millennial, sir?
Hey, you're a youngster to me. Yes, call forwarding did exist back then, and you'd punch in a code and then punch in the phone number you wanted the calls to be forwarded to, and it would do that. It was programmed. Initially, I think call forwarding existed within in-house phone systems. Like you'd go to an office and they'd have all these phone extensions and you could forward the extensions, but it soon became a commonly available feature, not maybe commonly used, but commonly available, that you could punch in this code. The phone company would register, yes, you want your calls forwarded to this other phone number. And so anytime a call would come into your home phone or office phone or whatever number that was associated with, it would forward to that number that you had programmed in until you turned it off by punching in yet another code. So yeah, it was a real thing.
Which is actually really clever in the context of what they do for a living, because when you think about it, they don't have cell phones. So if one of them is out doing legwork for a case and the other's trying to get in contact with them, the only logical way to do that is to attempt to maybe forward the call to the car so that they could get in touch with them that way. So I mean, obviously not meant to be intended to use this way, but Steele is a rogue. He's a rascal. So
yes, he's a skeezix.
Contemptible fellow.
And then the other one was the issue of the jet engine in the background and the movie 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, which was the telling of the Doolittle raid on Japan in 1942, early part of the World War II. And the aircraft in use at that time were B-25 Mitchells, twin-engine prop planes. Even over a phone, you can tell the difference between a prop plane and a jet. Why Laura didn't catch this, why she didn't pick up on that, I don't know, maybe she did, but we saw no evidence of it.
Yeah.
It's got to be her mother. Yes.
Yeah, her mother's, she's spun her sideways at this point, and Laura's just, she's not sure what to think. So, but yeah, and speaking of the jet, Daniel Chalmers, he steps off the plane. In the background, and Steele asks him once he hangs up how the flight was. And now we know if you didn't before, if you'd never seen the show before, now we know they know each other. And Daniel is claiming now to be a man named Sinclair and pretending to be interested in buying the plane as his private jet. So it's obvious he has used this ruse to get the owner of the plane to fly, to get a man to fly him around as a test flight, kind of like testing out a car. And he tells this man to give his card to Steele, and that Benton, he calls him Benton, and that he will firm up his decision by the end of the day. And the man does so. He's extremely anxious because, as he says, the fuel costs alone have been astronomical. I guess they've been flying away around for 5 days, and he's worried that Sinclair will back out. Steele reassures him he is serious in a very non-committal way, right? He says, would Mr. Sinclair have had you fly all over the place if he wasn't serious? And the guy's like, I don't know. And Steele's like, I do, and gets into the car.
It's kind of the same technique Hoskins used with Laura.
It is.
Of saying something that they know you will interpret a certain way, but you can honestly say, well, I didn't say that.
Yeah. I just asked him the question. It's very clever, because the minute he gets in the car, he rips up the card, and they drink. They toast to the chairman of the board and his faithful aide. So it's obvious that this is a bit they have done before. This is a con they have done in the past. Either that or Steele just caught on really quick. I'm assuming the former, though. I'm assuming this is something they've done before. And
the poor salesman.
Oh, God,
the poor salesman. Yeah. I mean, he talks about the fuel costs, and it's...
Yeah, you went down a rabbit hole here, didn't you?
Yeah, it doesn't seem real obvious, but based on what I could see, I determined that the plane in question is a Learjet Model 35. It burns about 197 gallons of fuel an hour at cruising speed, and the fuel capacity allows it to fly approximately 4 hours before it needs refueling. So if we just assume that they flew 4 hours a day for 5 days, at 197 gallons of fuel per hour, that is nearly 4,000 gallons of fuel. Now, the currency thing is a little bit, talking 1983 versus 2023.
Right. Yeah.
Back then, gasoline at the pump for cars was about $1.16 a gallon, and aviation fuel, jet fuel, was about 90 cents a gallon. In $23 US dollars, that's roughly $2.74 a gallon. So if you calculate it in 1983, it doesn't sound so bad, $3,600 for fuel. But in 2023 dollars, that's $11,000 of fuel. Now, somebody's paying for that.
It's one expensive test flight.
It's either the company trying to sell the plane or the salesman himself.
Yeah.
But either way, granted, they get a huge commission when they sell a plane, but they don't sell planes that often. They probably sell them even less than a real estate agent sells a house.
Yeah, like private jets especially.
And there'll be months that a real estate agent doesn't sell anything, and then another month they might sell 2 or 3 houses, but yeah, it's that's a lot of money to shell out on something that isn't going to turn into anything.
Pay off. Yeah. Yeah. Ouch.
Yeah, poor guy.
So we know that he intends to stay until he's dead, which, of course, that's where we get the cut.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're back in the office. Laura goes into the office where Abigail has calmed herself and asks what's wrong. And Abigail does her usual passive-aggressive response of, I don't want to burden you. And Laura says it's more of a burden not knowing. And Abigail
since you asked.
Yeah, since you asked, she tells her that she hadn't been in a relationship for a while until she met Dr. Harvey Fetterman, a children's orthodontist. And she claims that they met at a seminar on plaque, and she likes to keep current. And this is where I had a little bit of confusion, because nowhere before have we heard anything about Abigail having a job or what career she might have had. I've seen it a lot in fan fiction that she worked in a dental office, or that she was some sort of either secretary or even maybe hygienist or something. Mm-hmm. But when I had always interpreted it, and you had a different interpretation, that when she says, I like to keep current, I had always interpreted it as she just was a retired woman with a lot of time in her hands and would go to random seminars and things that were open to the public to quote unquote keep up. Like kind of like how back when you didn't have like the internet, you'd consume all the news you could, or you'd maybe go to these weird events to try to at the local library if you were on your own. And especially like elderly people sometimes do this. So I had sort of interpreted it that way, but you had interpreted it to mean that it was canonically established fact that she worked in a dental office in some capacity.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I took it, because first of all, how many people, even now, but especially back then, would be interested in plaque? Just hey, here's a seminar on plaque. Let's go. Yeah,
I mean, if you're that bored
not.
And you don't have the internet,
Yeah, well, I suppose. But, usually those types of things they're professional sessions, they're professional conferences and whatnot. And you don't just show up and say, hey, I'd like to attend a conference. No, you've got to be a credentialed person. And so the fact that she was there suggests that she was in some capacity, and especially that phrase, I like to keep up on. That's usually a phrase used by somebody who is in a profession, and they're going to get their continuing education credits or whatever. They're keeping up on the latest information, the latest technologies, the latest methodologies in their profession. And so the fact that she was there and the fact that she used that terminology, to me, suggests that she was, in fact, a dental hygienist. But I could be wrong.
No, hey, it's...
I've been wrong once before, so it could happen again.
Just once?
That's all I'll admit to.
Fair. So she says they saw a lot of each other and that they were planning a weekend away. And she's even like, I don't want to scandalize you, dear, but we were planning a weekend away. And she even bought a whole new wardrobe in his favorite color, purple.
Yeah.
And then she said before that could happen, he proposed. And, Laura's on the edge of her seat saying, proposed? He proposed marriage? And no, he asked to bring his wife along so they could get to know each other. And so here's my question, because and I reading the script, there's actually a line that was cut out here as well. She says that it was his wedding anniversary, his 15th wedding anniversary, and he couldn't leave her at home. So my question is was she ever actually in a relationship with Dr. Harvey Fetterman? Because there are two ways that this could be interpreted. Way number one is that they weren't actually in a relationship. They were just friends, and Abigail, having feelings for Dr. Fetterman, had interpreted it incorrectly. Maybe they were getting together for lunch or something, and she had just assumed that this was something romantic, whereas he saw it as something platonic, and then invited her to this conference thing, whatever, in Oxnard, and said, oh yeah, by the way, I invited my wife too. It's our anniversary. So it could be that. That's way number one. Way number two is Dr. Harvey Fetterman's one kinky fella, because he's looking for maybe some sort of polyamorous relationship, because the only reason I can think, I cannot understand how you could invite your wife to meet your mistress on a weekend away unless you're hoping that they get along so that you have like
so you can get along.
Relationships with, yeah, so you can get along. Like, that's the only, which side do you land on here?
Well, based on the script or based on what we get in the episode? Because based on the script, there is a line that kind of suggests former that you were talking about. Because she says, Harvey and I were planning a weekend together. Nothing obscene, mind you, separate bedrooms, of course.
Yes, yeah.
But that's not in the episode as it airs.
No, it is not.
And so that does kind of throw a slightly different light on it. Yeah. But even with that line in there, you got to wonder, well, why are you inviting this woman away for a weekend? So, when you think about that and then you look at the way it's in the episode as it aired, it's like, no, the doctor had something more in mind than just a conference. He had another kind of conference in mind.
Yeah. Dr. Harvey Fenneman, get down with your bad self. You know? Guess Abigail's not into that. She's a one woman. You know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. She's a one woman, one man woman. A one woman man woman.
Why can't we word? What's wrong with us?
I don't know. English is tough.
So yeah, she says she couldn't be a good sport about things. And so that they are now at the Ramada, and she is with Laura with a suitcase full of purple clothes. And that's when she bursts into sobs again. And it's clear that Laura has no idea what to say. So she tries to get away by telling her she has business to attend to. Abigail immediately grabs Laura, freaks out, and says, "You're not going to leave me here." So then we cut, and Laura's walking into an upscale hotel with her mother in tow. She has brought her along on the case. She tells her mother not to say anything as she is undercover, something we know she's terrible at anyway. And she approaches the front desk and tells the clerk she is Myrtle Groggins from the Society for the Preservation of Train Travel. Why do we think she's using Myrtle here when she hated it so much before?
That's a good question. I don't think there is an answer for that.
No. unless because Steele did say that Myrtle is such a, what was it he said, is dull and plodding. And she's trying to, like, she's got this, like, I'm Myrtle Groggins from the Society of Preservation of Train Travel. Like, she's got this very monotonous tone that she's adopted for Myrtle. So it could be that she's just merely taking Steele's interpretation of Myrtle and using that to her advantage in trying to get information on Chalmers by essentially being the most unassuming and boring person on the planet, is my theory.
You know, as we're talking here, it reminds me also the fact that she brought her mother along. Thou shalt not steal. I think it's so sweet that you get your mother involved.
I could never do it. Yeah. She's doing it again.
Yeah.
And they make a good team. Like, she, at one point, the desk clerk asks who she is, because Abigail makes a comment and she says female traveler of the month, to which Abigail supplies that she's supposed to be at a hotel in Oxnard, which is very funny. So we've got this back and forth. She asks the clerk if Daniel got her message, I think, Daniel Chalmers, and he says no, he's not in, and goes and checks the room number, to which the camera zeroes in on a very, very teeny tiny room number, like across the desk. There's no way that she'd be able to see that from where she was, unless she had x-ray vision, but apparently she does. So yeah, she basically says to contact him when he gives her card and says, have him contact me. We're really interested in having Daniel ride their rails before walking away. Which is a great statement. I like it.
Yes. It's very, that's one of those, it's not quite a double entendre. It's not quite a dirty joke, but it's very close to getting there. It's
also something that you could definitely see as a slogan. Right, for a company, like, come ride our rails, right, or come fly the friendly skies, or whatever you want to. I could definitely see it. Yeah, no thanks. I've done that once. But yeah, so they go. Yeah.
Maybe we need to have story time sometime. Anyway.
Oh, it was terrifying. It was terrifying. Anyway, so Laura and Abigail, they get on the elevator. They're going up to check out the hotel room. And Laura says she's actually flattered that her mother came to her about what happened and not Francis. So it's obvious she sees this as an opportunity to try to connect with her mother. And Abigail, once again, very passive-aggressively says she can never tell Francis about this because she and Donald are so happy together, and she could never relate to a loser in love.
But I could.
Yeah. Is Abigail trying to be cruel, or does she just genuinely not understand how hurtful a comment like this is?
I don't know. She just doesn't think. No. She opens her mouth and stuff falls out, and no concept of what the consequences of what she says would be, how it comes across. And it's because she's so self-absorbed. It's all about her, and if somebody is collateral damage in her pity party about herself, well, that's just the way it is because it's all about me. So,
and she points out that Laura's not exactly besieged with suitors, which is also like, ouch. So Laura says they have something in common, to which Abigail replies, emptiness. Oof. And so, she
kick after kick after kick.
Yeah, that's something. And she storms off the elevator, goes into the hotel room. They start poking around, looking for signs that someone's actually staying there. Abigail finds a pad with some numbers written on it, and Laura says that she's doing very well, to which Abigail snarks, I would have done better in Oxnard.
And that notepad is nicely done because so often in TV shows, when somebody discovers a notepad that somebody's been doodling on, it's nice and neat. It's a row of numbers, phone numbers, or information, one right after another, like you would write it out on a sheet of notebook paper for a school essay in grade school or something like that. Whereas this was random with doodles and written at weird angles. And it was very much more like what you would find somebody doing in reality as opposed to television's version of reality. So nicely done, Steele.
What kills me too is when you see a character in a TV show or movie write something down on a pad of paper and then leave it there. Because obviously someone has to find it. And you're just like, okay, do you have a photographic memory? Or because I would have to take that piece of paper with me. I forget my own name half the time. So,
that explains the tags in the back of your shirt.
It does, doesn't it? So we get another scene change. Steele is at home with Daniel. Daniel congratulates him on what on his living situation. We had a bit of a back and forth over the use of the word con, because I originally said that Daniel congratulates him on what he sees as a con, which I didn't quite mean it that way, in the sense that Daniel doesn't think that Steele is conning Laura per se, or what have you. He's just happened to manipulate his way into a situation where he has a bit of an easy life, which is what con men or con women are constantly trying to do. They're trying to get the next score, the next thing that leads them to the easy life.
Yeah, well, and he's found himself in a situation that is in its entirety a con.
Yes.
And it's more interesting is it's one that he didn't create.
No, he just kind of adopted
Stepped into it, yes.
Yeah. And he points out that it is rather novel helping people. And Daniel is grateful for that, to which he says, that bad, is it? And then Daniel asks Steele if he remembers a man called the Major, which is obviously the name of his partner. Steele says he does and asks how he's doing. And then Chalmers says he's dead and explains what happened at the casino. He says that he was planning to finance his retirement by relieving Hoskins of his money at the casino, which was known to be the crookedest casino in London. And this is interesting because at this point, Daniel describes himself as a person who hops from continent to continent, relieving greedy people of their ill-gotten gains. Is this where Steele gets his sense of honor from? Because I get the impression from this that Daniel's cons, while obviously taking from people, they're rather bloodless in the sense that he's not, and nobody's getting hurt physically, and he's targeting people who are, in his mind, bad people that kind of deserve it. little bit of a Robin Hood syndrome.
There is definitely a tone in what he says there of that attitude. Although I think the aircraft salesman might disagree.
Well, I mean, depends. Is it a company that's, some sort of morally ambiguous company? Have they had bad business practices? We don't know.
Well, I suppose that's a possibility. But, the thing is that in any kind of situation like that, there's always somebody who is going to get hurt because they're involved that
True.
doesn't necessarily deserve getting hurt. But no, yeah, you're right. I mean, there is that sense in what he says that he has certain standards about who he takes on as a mark.
Yes.
And that even though honest people might sometimes get caught up in his cons and be hurt by it, that's not his target.
Right.
His target are crooked people, dishonest people, people like Hoskins who solve their problems with bullets as opposed to, other means. But yeah.
And for all we know, Daniel may be an anti-capitalist. Maybe he went after the plane company. I don't know. I'm just making up that. But yeah, he tells Steele that the Major missed getting out by a step, and that before Hoskins killed him, the Major gave up his name, which Daniel doesn't seem to hold against him. I'm assuming because Daniel kind of figures that if the situation was reversed, he would do the same.
Yeah, I mean, the guy's trying to save his life and his skin by
doing
what
right?
he can, but by doing what he was told would accomplish that. So, yeah, I mean, you can kind of understand.
So he plans on letting Hoskins find him and to fake his death. And Steele tells him he's got a hotel room booked in Daniel's name. And Daniel says he left a slew of phone numbers to be traced by Laura.
Steele
apparently,
said that,
the lawyer. Oh, so yeah, sorry.
Steele
He
said
left
that,
the. But apparently, the lawyer who recommended Remington Steele owed Daniel a favor, and he wants to keep it in the family. And this is where Steele didn't realize that Laura was going to be roped into this. And he's almost viscerally uncomfortable with this and asks why not just have Remington Steele locate him, to which Daniel says he needs him for a far more demanding role. So we had a little slight disagreement here on why Steele didn't insist on at least informing Laura so that she doesn't go into this blind, especially when he knows that Hoskins has already killed one person over this. Right. So I kind of thought that it's one thing for him to pull a con to help an old friend in his own time, but involving Laura without her knowledge kind of crosses a line, and he knows that, and that's why he doesn't like it.
My contention was, and I think still is, that Laura's really bad at undercover work. She is really bad at pretending to be something. She's not a good con person. She did halfway decent there at the hotel with the train travel monthly or whatever it was. But in general, I mean, she's really bad at undercover work. And telling her about the con, knowing what she would have to do, would probably put her in greater danger than just keeping her in the dark. Because as long as she's in the dark, she has plausible deniability.
Plausible deniability, folks. There it is.
Sure, yes.
I feel like
confetti flying everywhere.
Ding,
yes.
ding, 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 ding.
But, so she's able to maintain that realism because she honestly doesn't know that there's a con going on behind it. So she's able to portray that honestly, and if push comes to shove, she can say, "I don't know." Whereas if she knows, yeah, she doesn't act it out very well. So that would be a dead giveaway.
So my argument back here is she's bad at undercover, but she's very good at her job. We've seen in the episodes where they've worked the same case separately, they usually get to the same place around the same time. So he should know that at some point she's going to figure out he's involved. And it's weird. She's bad at undercover, but she's not bad at acting. We see that with the Sting. She's very good with Hoskins, leading him where he needs to be, playing her part when she needs to play it, pretending to be the jaded employee, angry at Steele's taking all the
I would contend that her acting is not that great there. That if Hoskins was more on his game, he would have spotted something, because it is a little pretentious. It is a little bit almost overacting on her part at that point. But okay. I'll shut up.
No. I mean, I this is the point, right? We can't agree all the time. It would be boring.
Yes.
But I'm going to go with he should have told her, because she's just going to be even more pissed when she figures it out. And
in an ideal world, that you would be correct, but this isn't an ideal situation that we're talking about. This is where they were roped in without their knowledge. Even Steele was perhaps somewhat roped in without his knowledge.
Yeah.
And so at that point, he had to make a decision as to what's going to be the best way to handle it. Yes, eventually they're going to wind up at the same place. Laura's going to figure out that something's going on, but that's down the road, and that can be dealt with later. Right now, in his mind, what's important is Laura dealing with Hoskins as genuinely and as honestly as possible. And that's not going to happen if she knows it's a con.
Okay.
And we can deal with problems later. You kick that can down the road.
I often say this is a problem for later me. Later me can deal with it. Monday me and Friday me do not get along. Friday me is like, this is a problem for Monday me. And then Monday me is like, Friday me, you and I need to talk, because I don't like Friday me when it comes to Monday. Anyway,
I don't need this on a Monday.
Yeah.
The other thing is that in his line here, Daniel says, we must keep this in the family. Mm-hmm. I interpreted that, and I could be wrong, but I interpreted that as not only did he know that Remington Steele is a fake, but he also knows everything about what's going on between Steele and Laura. He knows that Laura created it. He knows that Steele walked into the part. He knows the whole story, even though Laura has no clue about Daniel.
I'm guessing I would agree with that up to he probably doesn't know. He probably suspects that there's something going on between the two of them, but I doubt Steele has said anything about their romantic situation. I mean, this is someone he considers a mentor.
He's probably mentioned it in passing and lightly as she's really interesting. I find her intriguing.
Yeah.
The kinds of things that are non-specific, but to somebody who knows him
can figure it out.
Pick up on clue on it. It's like, he's hooked.
And also mentioning that they want to keep it in the family when you've got literally Stephanie's dad saying that line is cute. Right? Because you've literally got the family and Laura's quote unquote family with Abigail. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of family going on here. So, which is funny. And we've got the doorbell go, Steele asking who it is, pretending to cough and sputter. Laura says it's her, and then Abigail chimes in, and me, which is Steele's worst nightmare. Yes. He gets Daniel to gather up all the caviar and the wine, sends him into the kitchen. Well, he puts on a dressing gown and pretends to cough. And this is one of those things that drives me crazy in TV, where they keep buzzing even though he's already responded. Like, he can't teleport there. Give him a minute.
Hurry up.
Like that.
Hurry up.
I'm filled with anxiety when I see that, because like I'm always really, I don't know what it is, but if someone knocks on the door, I feel like I have to get there immediately or they're going to walk away or disappear or something. So it just drives me nuts. But so they come in. Abigail says they're sorry to disturb him, but Laura spent all day making chicken soup. When? And really? Did Abigail make the soup? Who made
Campbell's
the soup?
In a microwave.
Yeah. You think Campbell's made it? Did it come in those little foil packets?
No. The tin can, you know, you get out the can opener, open it up, dump it in the glass bowl. You throw it in the microwave for 2 minutes, and there you go.
So they bring in the soup, or Abigail brings the soup into the kitchen, only to be startled by Chalmers, who says he is here to brew a spot of tea for a sick friend. And it's the script very clearly delineates when he switches from an American accent to a British accent. So when he's Reginald Frobisher, he's affecting a British accent, but when he is Daniel Chalmers, he's supposed to be giving an American accent. But you pointed out that he sounded slightly British the whole way through, and my response to that was that I think it's Daniel Chalmers' passport says he's Canadian, the one that says Daniel Chalmers. So I'm wondering, is he? Is that his real name? Is he actually Daniel Chalmers? And is he Canadian? Because I would say that accent sounded kind of Canadian, but what do I know?
What do I know?
What do I know?
I'm just one of those stupid Americans.
I'm just one of those silly Canucks, right? I don't know. That's my own headcanon is that that's his real name and he's Canadian because I like that idea. But so yeah, he introduces himself as Colonel Reginald Frobisher of the 10th Royal Hussars. Do you want to tell everyone what the 10th Royal Hussars are?
Well, the problem comes in when he brings Steele into that and suggests that they were comrades in the 10th. The problem is, the history of the 10th is that it was a cavalry regiment of the British Army, initially raised in 1715. It saw service in 3 centuries, including the First World War and Second World War, but then was amalgamated into the 11th Hussars, the Prince Albert's own. The 10th was the Prince of Wales' own, and then they were absorbed into the 11th, which is Prince Albert's own, to form the Royal Hussars, Prince of Wales' own, in 1969, which means that if we accept that Steele was born the same time that Brosnan was in 1953, he would have been 16 when the 10th was dissolved. There's no way they could have been comrades in the 10th and been out on the Punjab. No, it doesn't. The math doesn't work. The math doesn't work. I mean, I'm not a math genius, but I can figure out that it doesn't work.
Yeah, well, I mean, clearly they weren't, actually. This is a lie. But yeah, Laura, if she knew anything about British history in that respect, would clue into that really quick. And I think, I don't know if it's, or you could, and I don't necessarily think that she is an expert in military whatever, but I think she can smell a lie. And it's very clear once this guy pops up and starts talking about the Punjab and his faithful lieutenant, which props for saying it right. Just saying.
It's just too polished.
Yeah, it's too ridiculous. And it's another one of his schemes. So I think this would have been a great idea a great place for him to come clean, because he's just digging himself in further by going along with this, but he doesn't. And
sometimes people just can't let the shovel down. I'm thinking of an episode we recently recorded where I kept shoveling, thinking I was digging my way out, but I was just going deeper and deeper.
No, it was, So Steele, she asks when he'll be back in the office, tells him they have a client named Hoskins who insists on meeting him. His response with medical coverage run out, has it, is funny. Yes. But so he doesn't come clean, and we switch over to the bar scene where Chalmers and Steele are in the bar. Hoskins is overthrowing darts. Chalmers gives Steele the rundown on Hoskins, saying he hates Americans and is fanatical about soccer, especially Manchester. And this is one of the spots where I say, well, you can tell this was not written by a British person, because if it were, they would have specified which Manchester team. Manchester has 2. There's Man City and Man United. And granted, Man United was a bigger team at that point. It wasn't so much bigger that you wouldn't have to specify, because they were both in the first division at that time. At the end of the season, Manchester City was relegated, which means they went down a division. But at that point, they would have been both playing in the same division. So, he would have it would have made sense for him to say Manchester United instead of just Manchester.
Later in the episode, there is a reference specifically to Man United. But
yes.
Yeah, here in this context, you would have specified probably one team versus the other.
Yep.
Unless everybody knew everybody, and so it was assumed.
Yeah, and if you knew that,
you were talking about.
Yeah, it's Man U, whatever.
Yeah.
So Steele approaches Hoskins and the other man, who is one of theirs. He's working for them, and proceeds to pretend to threaten to collect money this guy owes, quote, Daniel, or in this case, Jake Tucker, for betting against Man U versus Leeds. And this makes sense, as Leeds were a Division II team at the time and wouldn't be anywhere near Man U's caliber. So betting against Man U in this case would be stupid. So immediately, Hoskins is interested and in Steele as the persona of Johnny Todd. And he claims that being a fan runs in the family, as his uncle used to play for them. Hoskins latches onto the name of Jack Todd and is suddenly very interested in what's going on. He says that Jack Todd was the best goalkeeper in the first division. And my husband is a huge football fan, so this is where I'm getting my knowledge from, and who I consulted whenever soccer/football question comes up. As far as we can find, there is no Jack Todd that played keeper for Man U during that time period, or even before that, 70s, 60s. We couldn't find anything. So this is fictional. Jack Todd is a fictional character, but apparently best goalkeeper in the first division. So this kind of ingratiates Steele to Hoskins. He threatens the other man, who runs off. Well, Daniel wanders up and proceeds to insult the English by saying they're batty about soccer because they like to watch men in shorts run around. Steele introduces him as his boss, Mr. Tucker, and the two men start playing darts. Daniel tries to place a bet with Mr. Hoskins, who initially refuses, but he goads him into it. Here's what I noticed when thinking about this a second time around. He puts the little plastic thing over the middle so that his shot misses.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of those things that is commonly sort of a darts misconception. The bullseye is not the best scored necessarily in the game. It's one of the harder shots, but like all of the, I don't know, pieces of the pie around the circle in a dartboard have point values on them.
Mm-hmm.
So getting a specific point value more than once could help you win the game. I'm assuming they just did this because the bullseye is the established, like, if you can hit the bullseye, you're the best at this, whatever. So,
yes.
Yeah. But that was one of my husband would have, again, watching that gone, well, actually, this is not, whatever. So he puts a little plastic thingy over there, and Hoskins' shot bounces off, and Steele, or he says that Johnny will be over to collect in the morning because Hoskins doesn't have the money on him, which is what they were hoping for.
You know what, though? I'm thinking about that piece of plastic. I had two questions. First of all, why didn't Hoskins see it after Steele came back and handed him the darts?
Yeah.
And even if he hadn't seen it, how did he not realize after the fact that it was there when he tried to throw again?
When he kept playing.
Still kept bouncing
I thought
off.
that too. Yeah. Like he would have, if he continued to play, or somebody came to play with him and went, oh, wait a minute, where did this come from?
What's this?
Yeah,
you trying to cheat me, Hoskins?
Yeah. This would have been something. I guess maybe we have to assume he left shortly after and, I don't know, didn't notice. But yeah, it kind of doesn't make sense. You would think that Steele would find a way to kind of take it off after and then leave. But we get the next day, Laura is in Hoskins' hotel room. She gives him a rundown of all of Daniel's movements, which he expected her to find, and says it will take longer to locate him. Hoskins flips out and tells her that the next person he expects to see in this room has to be Remington Steele, which is funny because when she storms out, of course, the other elevator opens and Steele, as Johnny Todd, gets off. He knocks on Hoskins' door. Hoskins gives him the money, tries to shut the door, but not before Steele tells him that Tucker cheated him. That gets his attention. He lets him in. He asks why Johnny would tell him that, and Johnny gives this whole story, or Steele gives this whole story about having placed a bet with Tucker he couldn't afford. He's working it off as his collector. Hoskins says, I hate it when people try to make their problems my problems, but he clearly has his attention. So Steele tells him that Tucker runs a sports betting casino that places bets for sports all over the world, including soccer games in England. Given that he's playing an English fan, this is my point where I'm saying he would have said footy here, or football. He's pretending to be an Englishman. Well, he is an Englishman. He's an Englishman talking to another Englishman, pretending to be a fanatic about the sport. He would have said...
Can't even call it by the right name.
Yeah, he would have said football or footy, because footy is the more common... Yeah. So, he claims to be able to get the results of the games before anybody else. He says he knows how to do this, and he knows the winner when he places the bet, but he needs someone to place it for him. Hoskins asks how much he's going to put in. He says $2,000 with 20-1 odds means about $40,000 for a fresh start. This is really smart because I think if, quote unquote, Johnny Todd had said he was putting in more money, that would obviously be a red flag because he's not supposed to be able to get out from under Tucker's thumb at the moment anyway. So he can't have that much to put in, right?
Right.
He says he wants to see how it works. He says he's just curious, but they've got him, right? He's hooked.
It's theirs to lose at this point.
Yes. Yeah. And then we've got our scene change where Abigail is happily rearranging Laura's furniture. She's in a really good mood. She points out the 24 roses sitting on his desk, to which Laura says they aren't really Steele's style. And Abigail says they aren't for Mr. Steele, to which Laura's a bit surprised, but then the phone rings and she picks it up and Bernice tells her that the call is for Abigail. Abigail, obviously expecting the call, begins flirting shamelessly with whoever's on the other end, asking Laura for some privacy. And when Bernice tells her it's Chalmers in his other persona, Laura yells for Murphy, very upset. And it's interesting that Murphy is nowhere to be seen until she gets worried about Chalmers and her mother. With Steele out with the flu, you'd think that Murphy would have been in on the case, but nope, she didn't even talk to him about it. So that's a little
apparently
odd.
It was tied up on something else.
Yeah, I guess that's what we're going with. But yeah. So she took her mother to the hotel, but not him. And then we've got another scene switch. Steele and Hoskins show up at a house with a giant satellite dish out front. Johnny Todd introduces Hoskins to a man named Pinsky, who then tells him that he built this satellite and with it he can punch into any broadcast in the world. Steele points out that means they can monitor any sporting event live and Leon can call them up with the outcome. So is this something that they have had in 1983? Would such a satellite exist?
Satellite dishes?
Like that big?
Yeah, satellite dishes, yeah.
Yeah, I know satellite, but like something this size that you could use to punch into any, because you wouldn't be able to get any sporting event live. In fact, it's sometimes even difficult to get certain streams because of sporting rights and things like that. Even now, I know, for example, there's some football games Scott can't watch because either streaming company A or B doesn't have the rights to it, so they just can't see it. It doesn't get aired or whatever. But like, would a satellite dish this big be able to punch into any live broadcast anywhere in the world in 1983?
Well, as far as the size of the dish itself, that is a fairly accurate representation of satellite dishes back in that era. I mean, this was back before dish TV and such, when you had little 18-inch discs that you just put on the roof of your house or on the side. Back then, that's what you needed to pick those up. Now, could they pick up any broadcast? Here, that's a multifaceted issue because, first of all, in order to pick up the signal, there has to be a signel, which means it has to be being beamed through the ether to a satellite to come down somewhere else to be rebroadcast. So that's the first problem. Is that particular sport, is that particular event being broadcast? The second one is, and I'm just talking theoretical here because I'm not an expert in this area of telecommunications. Some of the signals that come through are going to be encoded in a way that you need to have special knowledge, special equipment to decode because they don't want anybody just picking it up and being able to watch it directly off of the satellite feed. So there's going to be encryption and things like that involved. Now, assuming that you could resolve those issues, there may also be another issue of simply connecting to the signal from a particular satellite, because a lot of the satellites are privately owned, and it's like an internet connection. You have to have the username and the password to connect your computer to your router and your router to your internet service provider. So if they've got security systems on their satellites, privately owned satellites, it's similar to that, then you'd have to crack that as well. So there's challenges. Now, having said that, there was a guy name of, what was it? It was a guy named Steve Wozniak. I believe it was.
That's Steve Jobs' partner, wasn't it?
Yeah. And one of the first things that they developed was a little box that decoded and got by long distance call restrictions from phone companies. If you remember, especially on landlines, not so much on cell phones, when you would dial a phone number, you would hear a beep, 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 different tones.
Yeah.
Phone companies used a set of tones back then to allow technicians to do testing and make calls that were not billed, because it was part of their job to do testing on the systems. And you don't want to have the technician go through all this garbage to get authorized to make this connection because it's got to be billed or something, whatever. So they gave them a special set of tone sequences that they could use to bypass this system and make these long distance calls for free. And people like Steve Wozniak developed little boxes that they sold to do that. And they didn't sell them to the phone company people. They were selling them to, ordinary people. So despite security systems, there's ways around it if you know the technologies.
Yeah.
So could Penske have done this? Conceivably, yes. Would it have been simple to do? Probably not.
So the other issue that I then have with this is that they go inside and Steele tells Hoskins to name any city, to which Hoskins responds with Liverpool, and immediately they're able to bring up the Liverpool-Newcastle match.
Mm-hmm.
There is a 8-hour time difference between LA and the UK. So what time is it? Because
it's obviously daytime there in Los Angeles.
If it's like 8 a.m., right? Like it's daytime in the shot. So it's daytime in LA and it's daytime in the feed that they pull up. So, and he immediately recognizes it. He says that's the Liverpool, I think it's Everton match, right? So there's two conclusions that I would draw from this. One, they just screwed up and they didn't realize that there's an 8-hour delay in the script, and we're just supposed to take it on fact. Two, this is actually a pre-recorded game that they're trying to pass off as being a real live event, and they've picked Liverpool and Everton, maybe a previous game that they've somehow recorded or whatever of Liverpool playing Everton to make Hoskins think that he's watching the real thing.
There's a math problem there.
When in fact it's maybe last week's game or something to that effect.
It's the
yeah. So do we think it's the second? Is it?
I love my daughter. I love all my kids, but my youngest daughter has a trouble with the concept of time zones. When they were living in Colorado, they would call, and to her, it's like X o'clock. And to us, it's like, it's right. You realize this is right in the middle of our dinner, right? Which is a running family joke.
Yeah.
But yeah, some people just have issues with time zones. Maybe Hoskins is one of them. He doesn't, all he thinks about is there's a football game on today. It's Newcastle and Liverpool and this must be the game. And so he just doesn't think about it. But yes, there's definitely a flaw in the presentation that Leon and Johnny Todd are giving.
And the other thing that I was not sure about is that Steele says there's a 2-minute and 16-second delay, which gives them enough time to place a sure bet. Does he mean that there's only 2 minutes and 16 seconds with which they have time to bet? That's an awfully small window.
Yes, particularly when you consider that it's 2 minutes, 16 seconds from the time Leon gets the information.
Yeah.
Makes the phone call, because that phone call is in that 2 minutes, 16 seconds. And then after they've got that, well, now they're down to a minute and a half.
I mean, those delays exist now. Like, I remember watching, this is back in 2010. I remember my husband and I were in separate countries at that point because he hadn't yet gotten all his paperwork to come here. And we were watching the Olympic gold medal hockey game because that was the Winter Olympics in Vancouver, and it was the US versus Canada. And by the way, we won. Just saying. And he and I were both watching it, but on separate computers. But we also had a video call going. So he was watching it on his TV. I was watching it on my computer. And he actually had the more accurate feed. So there was a 30-second delay between what he saw and what I saw. So when Sidney Crosby scored that gold medal winning goal, he jumped up and cheered. And I was like, whoa, wait, what happened? Don't do this to me. Did we win? I mean, those delays exist even now. So
yeah, we're dealing with three different things here, though. Is the problem? What you're talking about is an internet delay because of the way the internet operates. It's not just a straight line from point A to point C through point B, like a satellite is, because it goes through all different servers around the world, and the route that it takes is not necessarily an efficient route.
No.
It's the most successful route. Now, on a satellite, where the problem exists here in the story that Johnny and Leon are giving
Yeah.
Hoskins is that there's a 2-minute, 16-second delay. Okay, well, that's 2 minutes and 16 seconds from the time that the image is captured
Yes.
on the cameras in Liverpool
Yeah.
till the time that that signal from that camera arrives in Los Angeles at Leon's system.
Yeah.
Now, that's the same delay that the other
Yeah.
systems have as well, because they would be getting the same feed off of the same satellite. So it's actually arriving at Leon's system and at the network at about the same time.
Yeah.
So unless the local channels that are showing those results are introducing their own delay, which is that 2 minutes and 16 seconds.
True. Yeah.
But that's not how it's presented.
No, it's confusing. It's
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I get what they're trying to do, and for the most part, this episode is pitch perfect in the rest of it, but this particular part of the scheme is...
Yeah, some of the technical details they get wrong. Yeah.
So then we've got...
But if we can ignore those.
Yeah, we're hand-waving them.
Yeah. Yes.
They come out of the little room, and Hoskins, basically, he's hooked. He demands all of Johnny's cut, or sorry, half of Johnny's cut. What am I saying? Half of it, and Leon's already in for a third, and he says,
yeah, so it's half of 2/3.
Yeah. So then Steele agrees to half, and then Hoskins threatens basically to kill him if the deal is anything more or less that he says. So he's got him, and this is where we get a scene switch. Laura and Murphy breaking into Steele's apartment, and of all people, Murphy seems uncomfortable with this idea.
Well, Laura's possessed. I mean, she's a woman possessed. Her mother's...
She is.
Isn't that an interesting situation, though? Her mother drives her mad, and yet the minute somebody questionable enters her mother's life, somebody who she doesn't trust and thinks is pulling something on her mom, all of a sudden she's there. I guess that's what you do, but yeah, it's interesting that she's rushing to her mother's defense after her mother just drives her so nuts.
Yeah. And I mean, she first claims that they're not breaking in.
We're just saving them the trouble of answering the door.
Then she peeks into his room in case he's, quote, napping, only to find he isn't there, and immediately goes for the suitcase that Daniel has conveniently left out. And this is where you're right. Murphy says he's never seen her so obsessed, and she says that anyone coming on her mother she wants to know about. So I'm wondering here, is this just about protecting Abigail? Or her mom's a grown woman.
Mm-hmm.
She can theoretically take care of herself. So why is she so determined
Because it's not about her mom.
Yeah, this is where I kind of landed too.
Because... like I just got done saying, it's interesting that she would latch onto that as being a problem with regard to her mother, but it's really about the fact she knows that Steele's up to something, and she doesn't know what it is, and she doesn't trust him. And
he's connected to it. And she was thrilled when her mother talked about Dr. Harvey Fennerman.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like the idea that...
up to the menage a trois, yeah.
Up to the menage a trois, yeah. That part is where she soured on Mr. Fennerman. But at first, she was so happy for her, right? And of course, the minute she sees that he's there and that Steele is connected somehow to him, it's she's projecting. Super projecting.
Mm-hmm. Red flags go flying, the antennas come
all
up.
over the place. Yeah. And this
Yellow
is where
cards
she finds...
getting pulled.
Yeah, if we're going to do the soccer thing, this is a definite yellow card. And then she finds his passports. So Leighton Sinclair, Britain. Eric Gunnar, Sweden. Colonel Reginald Frobish, Hong Kong. And Daniel Chalmers, Canada.
Yay.
So yeah, I'm going with, in my head, Daniel Chalmers is his actual name. But, I just want him to be Canadian. But Murphy here, he says, is this the same person that she's supposed to find? And asks what she wants to do about it. And she says she's going to blow the lid off of whatever scam they're pulling. So it did not take her long.
Nope.
She's figured it out. Steele comes into the boat that Daniel has co-opted for this sting and reports that Hoskins has taken the bait. He seems to be enjoying himself, which Daniel notes, and Steele admits there's nothing like a good sting. Daniel asks if he misses it, and Steele says that he has an occasional wistful longing, and when that happens, he cheats at solitaire until the feeling passes. Here is where Daniel comments on Laura and says that she is quite a bundle, describing her as intelligent, independent, and scrupulously honest, and then claims that that's everything Steele loathes in a woman. This does not fit for me. This does not compute. The scrupulously honest thing I can get behind, but I can't see Steele. Yes, he's had some blondes, but he doesn't strike me as the type who wants a dumb, clingy woman, even for a one-night stand. Look at Felicia. Felicia would not be... She's not scrupulously honest, but she's definitely intelligent and independent. So what do you think here?
Nadine wasn't.
No, Nadine wasn't. Fair. And neither was Miss Taplinger. But I think it's more the independent part. Like, okay, fine. I can hand wave the intelligent part, but he doesn't want attachments. So you'd think that finding women who are independent and not interested in forming them would be his number one goal.
I think it's... I don't think you can take any one of those things by itself.
Okay.
I think it's the combination of she's intelligent, she's independent,
and
which are okay until you throw in that last one. She's
honest.
Scrupulously honest. Now, intelligent and independent is a problem.
Fair.
Now it's a problem.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can get behind that because the other two. I mean, we've met Felicia. Felicia is intelligent. She's independent.
Oh yeah.
She's definitely not honest. She's the first two for sure.
No. Yeah, it's only when you throw that third one in there that the first two become negatives as opposed to positives. Yeah.
And then Steele says that she has a certain allure, which Daniel seems to understand, and he points out that he seems almost domesticated. Steele asks if it saddens him, and Daniel says it intrigues him.
Which is very reminiscent of Felicia's comment.
Yes.
And thou shalt not steal. There's a new feel about you, as if you've been smitten. It's obviously it's not the exact same words, but it's the same idea. You've been hooked.
Yeah. They've both commented on it now. They've both figured it out. Sorry. Talking. So yeah, you're right. They've clued into that. Daniel then pulls out a gun, to which Steele asks, is this strictly necessary? And Daniel says he's afraid so. And, there's that dislike.
Messy things.
Yeah, messy things. And clear dislike of firearms, because obviously we know how they never knew where the agency gun is. So obviously not a fan.
So that works out.
Yeah, exactly. Do you think Steele misses his old life? Is he completely happy where he is? Or is he kind of hoping to go back?
The thrill, the excitement that the old life presented. It was always on the edge. You never knew what was going on. You were living by your wits. You were always working something. Something was always going on. That is probably the part that he misses. The excitement, the challenge, the intrigue. He's still got that, but it's just in a different form. It's a little more domesticated, so to speak.
I agree.
So I think there's elements of it that he misses, but I don't think he's necessarily looking to go back to it yet.
And I don't think we've ever seen a moment where he's made a conscious decision to stay. But if we can pinpoint any moment as that, I think it would be this episode. Because Daniel even invites him later on, I think. He invites him to go, and he's like, no, I'm good. So I don't think he's necessarily consciously deciding to stay forever, but this episode is where he maybe has at least an understanding that he's happy here for now and he's not planning on leaving anytime soon, which is, so progress. And then we have this moment, Laura calling Steele into the office. He comes still pretending to be sick. I hope you haven't dragged a man in my condition out or whatever it is he says. She says, can you ask Bernice to call Hoskins? I've located Daniel Chalmers. He's masquerading as a colonel in the Royal Hussars. This is a brilliant moment of acting for both Stephanie and Pierce, because you've got Steele, he's turned his back. He's walking towards the door. She makes this statement, and you can hear it in her voice. She's got him, right? She's got him, and he freezes, turns very slowly, and there's that exchange, this unspoken exchange between them on their faces, where she's like telling him, you've betrayed me and I'm hurt. And you can see the regret on his face because he knew it was going to get there at some point and didn't want it to happen. And I just love it.
Yeah. It's it's one of those situations where, yeah, he kicked the can down the road,
Mhm.
like I said earlier, and he knew it was coming. But just because you know something's coming doesn't necessarily mean you're actually prepared
No.
for it. You think you are.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons you kick it down the road is that you hope that you never come across it again.
Yeah.
But yeah, no.
And he
came across it.
And he says, he admits, I realize that trust is not something bestowed but earned. And on the surface, I've done nothing to earn yours. She says, notice how I'm not
jumping
arguing.
in to argue with you?
Yeah. And then he says, the truth is Daniel stole $200,000 from Hoskins, beating him in his own crooked game. And now Hoskins is using her to lead Daniel to the slaughter. And she points out that Hoskins is not the only one using her. And Steele tries to argue that Daniel arranged for her involvement without his knowledge, which might be true.
Mm-hmm.
But can he really use this as an excuse now? He had the chance to come clean and didn't take it.
Well, the part that was left out that explains that, and I think kind of mitigates some of the criticism, is Steele says, Daniel arranged your involvement without my knowledge. And Laura says, but you were going to let me stumble around the edges of this charade, to which Steele responds, believe me, it's much safer there.
Yes.
So, yes, he knew he was being dishonest. Yes, he knew that he was going to have to face her wrath once she figured it out. But, again, it's one of those things where you do something knowing that it's going to anger somebody because, well, you didn't trust me. But you did it because in your judgment of the circumstances of the situation, of the facts that you know that this other person doesn't know, you do that because in your judgment, it's the lesser of the two evils, because it's going to be safer and better for them if you do this as opposed to that, even though they would, after the fact, say, well, you should have done this.
This is one of those things too where I think to myself, that I think would also bother Laura. The idea that he thought he had to protect her, because this is her job, this is her profession. She has encountered dangerous situations before, and she's used her wits to get out of them. And it's not as if they've come up against people with Considine, and she walked into a mobster's house and basically called him out in front of him and his buddies. Like, she's not.
But she was able to do that because she didn't know what Steele knew.
True.
She was able to do that because it was an honest response, because she didn't have to act like she didn't know something.
No, I realize that.
And I think that's really what was going on here with her and Steele, because like I mentioned before, she's really bad at undercover work. She's bad at acting a part. And I just think that Steele recognized that, yeah, she's going to be angry that I didn't tell her. She's going to be angry that I presumed that she couldn't take care of herself. But she's such a bad actress when it comes to this kind of a situation. We need that sincerity of her not knowing.
She does get better at undercover.
So she can,
throughout the course of the series.
Does,
she does
but
get better.
But at this point, she's still not really good, as we see in her little act with Hoskins later. And she's able to get away with that because it's at the very end of it, and Hoskins is more focused on other things. But at this point, or up to this point, it would have been too much of a risk. So, no, I understand what you're saying entirely. I just think, I think, like I said, he had to make a choice between two things that were not going to set well either way, and he picked the one that he thought was the least of a problem.
I think this is one of those situations where both of them have she has a right to be angry, even if he did what he did with, as you say, the best of intentions. She's still gonna feel betrayed by it, and should, right? So it's not an easy situation to kind of come to terms with. And then she demands to know what Daniel has in mind for her mother, sending her flowers, making her giggle like a schoolgirl. And this is cute, because at first Steele's a bit confused, and then he says perhaps he likes her. Right. And then he points out, just because a man earns his living on the shady side of the street doesn't mean he can't learn to care very deeply and very passionately for someone, and that it might make him want to change. Hello, projecting, table for one. Right. And this is very clearly not about Daniel when he says this, but
I think at the time he's saying it, he is not conscious of the fact that he's talking about it on two levels.
Yeah.
And then, of course, as soon as he does realize what he said, as soon as he does realize, I opened myself up. If she understands what I was really saying there. Okay, it's about Daniel. He's an old friend. He's in trouble. I'm just trying to keep him alive. Yeah. So, yeah. This is... He panics.
He does. He definitely... Yeah. So we get this scene change. This is one of my favorite scenes. Laura shows up at Steele's apartment. Daniel answers, calling it a delightful intrusion. In the kitchen, a voice can be heard saying, "Who is it, Reggie?" And Laura is shocked that it is her mother. Laura says she thought Abigail was going to a Garbo retrospective. Layers. Abigail has layers. Garbo retrospective. To which Abigail says she's seen it already. And Daniel admits he asked her mother to have dinner with him. She wants Laura out of the apartment. She does not want her there. She says that Reggie is teaching her how to get his souffle to rise. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've never heard it called a souffle, but okay.
Up Periscope? No, that's later. So here we have our fun little first double entendre, but what's funny about this, could this also be a subtle indication of where Steele learned to cook?
Could be, I suppose,
Because, Colonel Reggie here seems to know his way around a kitchen.
Or at least the cook.
Yeah. So Laura starts to take her coat off, but Abigail stops her, saying she can't stay because she's obviously on a case. Chalmers, on the other hand, says he's sure they can find something to talk about while she's basting the rabbit. And Abigail reluctantly leaves the room. He says it's a pity to waste the music. Laura retorts that she's been waltzed around enough. Despite this, they begin to dance. I love this. She's Stephanie and her dad. It is just it's perfect. It's just perfect.
You kind of imagine that when she was younger, they did that.
Yeah, you can definitely get that feel, right? They have that comfortability with one another, even if the characters don't like one another. Mm-hmm. So yeah, she says that she knows about his predicament. He asks if she will join the fray, and she says she isn't sure, but she wants to know everything she can about the man she calls Remington Steele and not the Punjab. So this is an interesting tactic to get to know more about his past, which is clever. And then he gives her the story. When he first met Steele, he was an uneducated, unsophisticated, and unwanted young man who was full of rage and violence. He says he found him on the streets of London, hustling for a quid, and took him under his wing as the son he never had. Here's a question. Do you think they were setting this up here, or did they decide later?
If it was a TV series being shot now, the way they sketch out entire character arcs, relationships, and they know when they start season 1 what's going to happen at season 5 at some point or whatever, then you would say yes, they knew. But from what I have read and heard about television shows from this era, it's one of those things where they're just making it up as they go along, and somebody comes up with an idea based on something that happened in a past episode, and I like that. That's good. That could work. So were they setting it up? Very possibly in the back of somebody's mind, they might have thought, well, this would be interesting if we created this situation where we could then exploit it later on. But I don't know if they really sat down and thought about it that far ahead. I think it was.
Yeah,
maybe somebody's idea of a possibility sometime later, but
I agree in the sense that I don't know if it was their intention all along to make him Daniel's son, but it's obviously one of the excuse to bring Efrem Zimbalist Jr. back and making him Steele's mentor, somebody that Steele trusts, that he looked up to as a father figure. is a good way to do that. And it fills in the background to Steele's past. Again, she's getting this information secondhand and not from Steele, which is a theme that we've seen going on. And this basically is essentially what he told Amy Fogelson, although from a different perspective, right? Because Daniel found him and he was unwanted, uneducated, unsophisticated, and filled with rage and violence, which is very different from the man that she knows at the moment. So it's, yeah, I think you're right that they may not have been directly intending it, but it was a really good, they left it open so that they could come and fill in the blanks later on. So Abigail pops in here, claiming they shouldn't detain Laura any further, and she assures her mother that she will be leaving in a minute. And don't rush off on my account, and goes back into the kitchen. And then Laura tells Daniel to go on, and he says the years were good to him. And Harry, which Laura picks up on, she asks if she grabs that like a dog with a bone. Harry, is that his name, Harry? And he says that's what he ended up calling Steele in self-defense. He says that he had a pocket full of names, and he doesn't think even Steele was sure which one was the real one and which was the product of his fertile imagination. This is the first moment where we get sort of a hint that Steele doesn't even know his name. Because if Daniel, his oldest friend and mentor, is saying, like, I'm not even sure he knows, it's, again, I wonder if they were setting that up, if that was something that they planned to play with later, or just Daniel's observations.
You know, the writers on this show are intelligent people.
True.
And I think a lot of times they would deliberately leave things where there were threads hanging here and there and some other place so that it gave them possibilities later on.
Yeah.
Not necessarily one specific thing in mind, like, oh, we're going to dangle this and eventually we're going to find out that Daniel's really Steele's father. But just in the sense that, okay, there's this thread hanging out. We have a lot of different things that we could do with it now.
Right. True.
So I think there's some of that going on here as well.
That's fair.
You know, the fact that he was a young lad on the streets, combining that with the story he told Fogelson, it makes sense that he wouldn't necessarily know his real name, which opens up all those different possibilities of things that we could do to create this other backstory somewhere else along the line. Well, we don't necessarily have a plan as to what it is.
And it confirms, remember, if we go back to Steele Belted, when he makes that comment about Brixton, and, you know, there was that question of, is he right? Is he wrong? Is he lying? Is he making it up? And I lean towards the, no, he probably did know all about Brixton, but was using that to his advantage in that particular scenario because he's been described as this young man full of rage and violence hustling on the streets, right? So you'd kind of have to be in order to survive if it's in a particularly bad area. But yeah, I think Laura gets a better understanding of him after this conversation. I'm thinking that's why she agrees to go along with the sting. And we don't ever see her explicitly making that agreement, but she's part of it now. Abigail pops out one more time and asks if Laura would like to sample the souffle. She says if she isn't intruding, Abigail goes back to the kitchen, and Daniel says, have I met your requirements? And she has one more. She demands that Chalmers say goodbye to her mother gently but firmly. She says she's on the emotional edge right now, and one more disastrous encounter might really hurt her. Is this fair to demand that Chalmers say goodbye to Abigail, or is this doing what Steele sort of did in that, assuming that she knows what's best and sort of taking that autonomy away from the person to decide for themselves?
Yeah, I think she's doing the same thing Steele, that she would have accused Steele of doing, or that she did accuse Steele of doing. Her mother is a grown-up.
Yep.
And her mother's entitled to make her own decisions, make her own mistakes. Yeah. You know, if she was concerned about how her mother would respond, then she could have made one of the requirements that you tell her what's going on.
Yes. Yeah.
Not that you drop her, clean. But that you tell her what's going on. You tell her who you really are, why you're really here. And if she knows their mother as well as she maybe thinks she does, she very likely could have gotten the same result.
True. That
her mother would have said, well, you know, you're just another Harvey Fenneman, which is a line that she uses later on. So, you know, sometimes you can predict the results of what a situation or what somebody knowing something is going to, how that's going to resolve itself. So, yeah, she could have done that and still left it her mother's decision, knowing that her mother would respond in that certain way.
I wonder if she didn't, because telling her that Chalmers is a con man might... Abigail doesn't know that Remington Steele is not Remington Steele, right? She thinks that
too, yeah.
he's... So that might
That's
have
true.
led back to her. So I'm guessing that's why she didn't. But
Other
yeah, you're right.
questions, yeah.
If she is going to be honest, she
that's
should
true.
be completely honest. Abigail pops back out with the souffle in a to-go bag, which is hilarious, and we even put a little plastic spoon in there. So she all but shoves Laura out the door, going back to waltz with Daniel. And Daniel, to his credit, seems genuinely disappointed.
Well, yeah. Can we hop back just a little bit, though? Because when Laura's confronting Daniel and she says, I want you to say goodbye to my mother now, gently but firmly. And then she says, no offense, you're not exactly Mr. Stability. And she's on the emotional edge as it is.
Yeah.
Another disastrous encounter, and there's no telling what might happen to her.
She'll do.
Daniel gets a look on his face. And I have this in my notes. It's like, oh, no, there's an idea.
Is this where he decides to use it?
That's right.
Maybe.
Did Laura give Daniel the idea for what happens later with Abigail on the boat? I'm just...
Could be, because...
Throwing that out there.
I didn't get the impression that he ever saw, up until you mentioned that, ever saw Abigail as anything but a charming woman who he enjoyed spending time with while he's doing this sting. But you're right, that could have planted a seed in his brain of, oh, okay, I can use this. I'm wondering what the original plan was. Who was supposed to originally kill him? Because
yeah,
he was supposed to be faking his death. Was it supposed to be Johnny Todd? I'm assuming so, because otherwise Laura would have been given the gun. I mean, she did have a gun. She had Hoskins' gun, but that had real bullets in it. So
yeah, but I mean, they may have had a different plan entirely.
True.
So we don't know that it necessarily involved having somebody pretend shoot him and him faking his death, although that would be the best solution.
Yes.
But yeah, you're right. It could have been somebody else doing it. And then when Laura said this, it was like, oh, you know what? Hey, keep it in the family. Yeah, this will work.
Yeah. Yeah. So then we get a scene change. Everyone's waiting inside the boat. A red light comes on, telling everyone that they should take their places. Hoskins is about to arrive. He comes in, and Steele says he's shaving it a bit close, but gives him the results of the Man U Arsenal game, which was 5-4. Hoskins goes to place the bet, but not before Laura barges in and threatens to shut the entire thing down unless she can look around. She explains to...
Now, I want to point out, this scene as well reinforces my point. When you look at how Laura is coming off on this, she is doing a bad... she's like a high school actress who's overacting her part. She is totally fake when she comes on. Step aside, Buster, or I'll blow the whistle on this barge. I mean, it's high school, high school at that.
She's no more fake than Steele when he's doing a Sam Spade.
Well, yeah, but see, he wasn't doing the Sam Spade to try and con somebody. He was just using it to try and intimidate people, and it wasn't working because it was so absurd. But here she's trying to con somebody, and when you're trying to con somebody, you want to come off as subtly genuine, not fake.
Well, I wonder, and this is where I'm going to play devil's advocate here, is that I wonder if this was...
always do.
Yeah, well, this is the point. I wonder if it was intentional in the sense that Hoskins is supposed to see her as an incompetent woman. And I mean, he already does because he's a sexist jerk, but I'm wondering if this is being done to reinforce that in his head. Like, she's blundering through there like a bull in a china shop, clearly doesn't know her way around the place or what she's doing. And that will only help when Murphy, as Remington Steele, basically, I mean, Murphy's overacting to the part too. Like, we'll get there, but like he's pretty extreme in his portrayal. So I'm wondering if this is meant to sort of reinforce, oh, she's just a silly woman. She doesn't know what she's doing. She's barged in here. I'm going to go with that.
I suppose that could be. It feels a little bit like, well, I've got to justify this a little bit, so I'll come up and grasp at anything I can. But I mean, there is some
Could be a bit
logic
of
behind what
both.
you're saying.
Could be a bit of both, right?
Yeah, a bit of both, yeah.
And yeah, so she explains to, quote, Tucker that she's looking for Chalmers on behalf of the client. Hoskins shrinks into the background, and Daniel basically says, go ahead and look. Steele goes and asks Hoskins if he's made the bet. Hoskins says there's a fellow here he wants to avoid, and before they can do anything else, Abigail bursts in, furious that he sent her a note. Steele is panicked.
Oh, she is so perfect in this.
Yeah. So here's my question, though. Is this part real or is it fake? Because if it's fake, how did Abigail find the barge?
I've got to think that Abigail's in on it at this point. I think Daniel did follow Laura's instructions to a point. He did tell Abigail that, hey, look, here's this situation. There was this guy over in England, and he killed a friend of mine while we were trying to.
In the Punjab?
Yeah. Well, we were trying to get some money from this guy because he's a cheat, and we were trying to make it right for somebody, and my friend got killed, and so now we've got this situation. I think Abigail's in on it at this point.
Okay.
And she's definitely a much better actor than Laura is. If that's the case.
When they carry her out, it's Abigail with an eye. I love that. That's great. So then, quote, Johnny returns to Hoskins, and Hoskins says that he didn't place the bet, but there's always tomorrow. Laura asks Daniel, whatever happened to Firm Gentle? And he says, I guess your mother doesn't take rejection very well. So then we've got a scene switch. Hoskins is leaving. Steele shows up, demands to know what's going to be done about his bet. Hoskins says, just put a bullet in his ear, and walks out. And then we have the Remington Steele scene where Hoskins goes to the office. Laura lets him in. She brings him into Mr. Steele's office where she presents Murphy as Mr. Steele. And he's sitting there smoking a cigar, his hair slicked back, looking
very
every
film noir.
bit. Yeah, well, looking every bit the smug Mr. Steele that Hoskins expects, right?
Mm-hmm.
He asks Hoskins if he wants a belt, and then gets Laura to get him a bourbon, calling her sweetie in the process. And then he says that Chalmers was right under their nose, only she was too dumb to see it. And makes it even worse by saying these broads think they can compete with a man. And this is where I say, I point out that Murphy is overacting here as well. This is extreme on the end of the spectrum of yes. And I kind of wonder if this is how he sees Remington Steele. Like in his mind, how he sees Mr. Steele as being not sexist, but like being smug and basically over the top and kind of like, yeah, I don't know, like not the persona necessarily, but the
arrogance.
The arrogance, yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Yeah, the arrogance of him. I'm thinking he's channeling, or thinks he's channeling.
It could be, but
or he's just having fun.
I think it's just more that he's having fun, and maybe like what you said earlier about Laura's overacting as being something that they're playing into Hoskins' preconceived notions. I think that's probably that more of anything, because up to this point, we've not seen, even if you took Murphy's behavior and just brought it down 75% to something that's somewhat realistic, we've never seen Steele behaving in that way.
No, I'm not saying.
And despite Murphy's attitudes toward him, he's never.
No,
I don't think he's viewed Steele in that way. So I think it's overacting.
I love the park it, baby, and listen to a pro.
It's classic 1930s, 1920s, not quite so honest detective.
Yeah. For sure.
Dashiell Hammett type things.
Yeah. So Laura sits down. Murphy explains that Chalmers was in disguise. Laura tries to explain that. Murphy interrupts, says he can do it, tells him basically the same information, that Tucker is Chalmers. And then again, we switch back to the boat. Steele is inside the boat, cheating at solitaire, which Daniel picks up on immediately. Invites Steele to join him for one last romp around the continent. Steele admits he's tempted. The phone rings. Before he can respond, he answers as Johnny Todd. And predictably, Hoskins is on the other end asking for Johnny to get the score for the Man U-Burnley match. He offers to lay on an extra 1,000, and Steele tells him to be there at 8 and hangs up. He then calls Laura, tells her that Hoskins bought it. Laura says that she and Murphy were nothing short of brilliant and laments that she can't tell her mother what's going on. And Steele says they will when it's all over.
No, actually, he doesn't say that. He says, we'll explain everything this evening, which, again, is one of those elusive, done statements that doesn't necessarily mean what you think it does, because at this point, I think Steele knows that Abigail's in on the plan. And so what he's going to be explaining is to Laura.
Yeah. By the way, we roped your mom in. Hope you don't mind, you know.
Yeah. If he's in trouble for not having told Laura about what was going on with Daniel before this, how much more trouble is he going to be in for not telling her that her mother's involved?
I think she'd eviscerate him. Just eviscerate him. And the moment that follows this is really nice. Steele telling Daniel that things might get a bit swift, and he wants to tell Daniel something he never had the courage to before. He thanks him, and they shake hands. And I'm wondering why he chose this moment to say that to him, because obviously this isn't something he says, I've never had the courage to say it before. So why now?
Well, I think maybe because there's the possibility things will go wrong.
True.
And the major it's a risky con.
So, yeah,
it's a risky con. One person's already died, and we know Hoskins' attitude about killing people that are troublesome. So I think he's just kind of conscious of the fact that, okay, if this goes wrong, this would be my last chance. So we'll keep it kind of light and casual and friendly and such, but I'll just say something to let him know, hey, it's been nice. Yeah,
I agree. And it's a nice moment. I think it's a really sort of, it's subtle, but it's very well done. And then we switch. Laura is sitting, having a drink in her office with Hoskins. She's called him there on her own. This is where she tells him that Steele didn't tell him everything about Chalmers because he didn't find him, she did. And she even goes so far as to say that she does the work and he takes the bows, and that she practically invented him. Hoskins is understandably unimpressed. And she continues by telling him that she needs every cent to start her own agency, and that if he wanted to make a contribution, she would tell him what else she found out. He says, let's hear it. She says, let's see it. He hands her the money, and she tells him that Chalmers has a dossier on him and the boat is a setup. And Hoskins says she's lying, demands to know how he would know. And she points out that he must be missing the wig and the hearing aid by now, which is...
I don't think she was ready for that question, though. No. Because if you notice, there's a pause when he says, well, how would he know that?
Yeah.
The wig. Yeah, I think she was caught off guard on that one.
And I agree. And I think it was a good save and well done from her perspective. Like, she kind of caught the ball.
But shouldn't she have anticipated that question?
One would think. One would think.
Yeah.
So Laura and Hoskins, they pull up in the car. She tells him that he won't get in carrying a gun, so he has to give it to her, which is smart. He demands that she come inside with him. He points out that Laura doesn't seem very principled, since she doesn't seem to care whether or not he may have killed someone. And she says she can't afford to be on what Steele pays her. So they go inside, and Chalmers has Steele pat him down. When he's vetted, Steele tells him that Burnley beat Manchester 6-0. And again, I'm wondering, did they just pull soccer team names out of a hat here? Because, first of all, 6-0 in a football game is insane. That almost never happens. You can spend 90 minutes watching a game and nobody scores, and that's fine because you're allowed to tie in soccer. It drives me freaking bonkers. So 6-0 is a hockey score, but it's definitely not a soccer score that you like. Anytime that happens, that is like a holy cow. This is insane. And yes, it would be like Burnley would not be expected to beat Man U by that much. I would expect it to be the other way around. If you're going to have a 6-0 score, you're going to play a team that's noticeably not as good, but like Burnley would not beat Man. So I don't know. I just think they spun a wheel and went, that's a soccer team. We're putting that in there. That's my rant. So then Hoskins puts $50,000 on the game betting against Man
That's
U.
too much, mate.
Which is crazy if they're, yeah. And then suddenly Abigail bursts in yelling, first my husband, then Harvey Fenneman, now you. She pulls out a gun, shoots Daniel, starts shooting up the rest of the barge. Johnny grabs Hoskins. They make a run for it. Laura grabs the gun from Abigail, who looks like she's having a great time.
Yes.
She's really enjoying
hello,
herself.
dear.
Hi, dear. Steele puts Hoskins in the car, and Hoskins says it was worth the $50,000 to see Daniel die, or see him shot. He says that Johnny is the only honest person he's met in this bum country.
Running gag of Remington Steele being given plaudits for honesty and being the only genuine person in
You're
a
the
group
only one I can trust.
Yeah. The only person is who they say they are. We've heard it before.
Yep. Which is, I love it. I just love it. So that's good. And then once he's on his way to the airport, everyone gets up. It appears Abigail was in on the sting. And we have a scene switch. So they're popping champagne. Laura demands to know why nobody told her. Steele asks if she would have allowed her mother to participate had she had known, and she says absolutely not, which I guess answers her question. Here's my question, though. She says there were real bullets. And Abigail says, not the ones I directed at Daniel. And then Laura is horrified that they gave her mother live ammunition, but she just said they were real bullets. So is that not the same thing? Is live ammunition, or is this my Canadian,
No,
I've never seen a gun moment where I don't understand firearms?
No, that's the same thing. It's just two different ways of saying the same thing.
But then she seems surprised by it when she's the one that just said it.
I guess maybe she's thinking that somebody else might have been firing the shots from some hidden place or something. Okay. I don't know. That inconsistency always bothered me as well because, you just got done saying that. Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay.
Maybe that was just something that slipped through from an earlier revision of the script and just
maybe.
I don't know.
Yeah. So Daniel invites them to visit him in the south of France in the summer. Abigail seems to consider it, which makes Laura uneasy. And then they toast and freeze. And
we had a reference to another. It was a play, but it was also a movie, The Corn is Green.
Right.
Betty Davis, John Dahl, Nigel Bruce, Warner Brothers, 1945. Although Abigail says she was in the high school play version of it.
Yes.
But here's my question. Should the show have had Abigail and Daniel become an ongoing item?
I personally would have loved that.
Yeah.
I think it would have been really funny to watch Laura and Steele stumble around with trust issues, but to see Abigail just be totally cool with the fact that he's going to pop in and out of her life at random intervals. She doesn't know where he is. She doesn't know when he's coming back, but she's fine with it. And every now and then maybe have Abigail say something like, don't be so old-fashioned, Laura. Like, live in the now. This is the 80s. She's Abigail suddenly be the, quote, modern woman. And I just, that would have been funny. I would have enjoyed that.
Well, it would have also, since we know that after season 1, Murphy and Bernice are gone, it would have also have provided that balance that Murphy and Bernice provided by the risk of not knowing. Okay, well, she doesn't know that he isn't real. Mildred has kind of the same thing, but it would have been from a different perspective of there's the risk that she'll find out that it's all been a fake.
Yeah.
And blow it by saying something to somebody, trying to keep her mother from finding out. Whereas with Mildred, it was kind of always trying to make her understand, no, he's the boss, but I'm in charge. So they were trying to explain it to her without actually saying it to her. But with her mother, they would have been forced to, again, kind of hide it.
Yeah.
And not let her find out.
Yeah.
So that would have been a lot of tension there, too.
It would have been a lot of fun. It would have been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Anyway.
So I guess that's it. Do we have any other thoughts on this, or?
My only thought is that, man, we just keep stretching these things out longer and longer. They're becoming marathon sessions.
Yeah. The Snyder Cut.
But there's so much to talk about.
There really is.
It's the writer's fault.
It is. I blame Fred Lyle and Duncan Smith.
Yeah.
Or no, wait. They didn't write this
everybody
one.
else. No.
They didn't write this one. Gary.
We blame the writers.
Michael Gleason.
It's their fault. If they weren't so good at their job, we wouldn't have so much to talk about.
Damn them.
Yes.
So, well, I mean, if there's nothing else on this one,
I've got nothing.
We've got a reminder to check out the website, www.SteeleWatching.com. We've got show notes, links to Amazon US and Amazon Canada, as well as our merch store. And there is also the options to make a donation, be a subscriber, whatever people want to do. This is, totally voluntary. And we thank everybody who has contributed so far. You guys are awesome. And other social media resources such as...
Yeah, we're going to have links to the official SteeleWatching Facebook page. We're going to have links to our official Twitters and Instagrams, plus a link to the Steele Watchers Facebook group, which is just a fan collection of Steele fans get together on Facebook, make comments, post things, pictures, videos, fan fiction. All kinds of stuff in there. So if you're not a member of that group, go become a member.
Join us.
This is subliminal messaging.
Yeah, listen to the episode backwards and you will hear.
Yes. You don't know that we're saying this, but you're gonna get it in your mind and you're going to just go and do it because you feel compelled and you don't know why.
As well as a really ripping recipe for lentil soup. Sorry, that's a Simpsons quote. Anyway.
Lentil. Wasn't he in the last episode?
Yeah, Wooly Lentil, Wooly Nigel, Wooly Lindsay. Yeah, no, that was the episode before it, but and you've got if I had the penultimate episode, you have the season finale.
Steele in Circulation, yes.
Yeah.
Coming up next. So yeah, I've got nothing.
I got nothing. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, and we will see you for Steele in Circulation. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.